this is the October 19th, 2021 meeting of the Egg Harbor City Municipal Land Use Board. In compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act, adequate notice of this meeting was posted on the City Hall bulletin board and advertised in our newspapers of record. And I ask the Secretary to please make this announcement part of the public record. And Don, if you would, roll call, please.
Here.
Mr. Hare?
Here.
Mr. Manos?
Here.
Mr. McGowan?
Here.
And Secretary here.
We have minutes of meeting September 21. Motion, is there a motion?
Make a motion.
Second?
I'll second it.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried, thank you. Resolution 4-2021-01, Egg Harbor City Partner 600 White Horse Pike. Is there a motion to approve this resolution?
I'll make it.
Second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, folks. New business, application 2021-04, Yeshiva Shagas Aryeh, did I say that correctly, sir? Yeah. Thank you. Which is the 500, 518, 526 Chicago Avenue, commonly known as the St. Nicholas School property. Mr. Nemag, good evening, sir. Mr.
Good
Chairman.
evening. Just briefly before Mr. Nemad begins, there's a couple procedural aspects. Number one, Mr. Timbers has stepped down as a council person. The mayor's not here. She typically stepped down, but she's not here, so that's obviously not an issue. Did receive a few letters on this application. I just want to make a note of that just for the record. I didn't really get the context of them. Letters are not admissible, they're hearsay. What the law states is the board secretary can accept them, puts them in the file, but they're not considered evidence. Anyone who wants to speak for or against or present any questions to the board should show up at the hearing. One was from Mr. James Barber. I believe Donna spoke to him and told him he would be here. He may or may not be in the audience. Another one was from Ms. Cooner, who is on vacation. I spoke to her today. She indicated she would have an attorney here representing her. Ms. Cook is here on behalf of Ms. Cooner, and potentially others, I'm not sure. We'll obviously find that out. And then another gentleman, Albert Giampetti, stopped by. I spoke to Donna. He wanted Donna to make some copies of some material and distribute it to the board. I spoke to him. I explained two things. Again, he would have to come to the hearing, so presumably he may or may not be here. And also, secondarily, it's not really Donna's job to make copies and distribute for the public, as an aside. But whether a letter is for, against, or neutral, they should be at the hearing, because that's hearsay. As far as procedure, in August, Mr. Nemad was here on behalf of his client. They presented an interpretation that was carried. So I believe, and we'll hear from Mr. Nemad in a second, he's going to incorporate his testimony from August, and then he's still going to ask for the interpretation and continue into the use aspect of it, and we'll hear everything, and at the end, we'll ultimately take two votes. I believe, looking at the minutes, Mr. Hare and Mr. Dixon, I don't believe the two of you were here in August. Is that correct?
I wasn't.
For this act? Okay. The rest of you were? I know Mr. Garfield, I believe so. So, when we proceed tonight, when we get to the vote on the interpretation aspect of it, the two of you should just abstain from that vote. And then if we get to the final vote on the use variance, then you should in fact vote. But feel free to ask questions when you participate. Again, I also remind everyone, as Donna reminded me, speak up, probably gonna be, tell you to speak up, so just, with that said, I don't have anything further, but
Thank you, Mr. Manos.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, my name is Stephen Nemad. I represent the applicant. I'm a member of the firm of Nemad, Davis, and Goldstein. I represent the applicant, Yeshiva Shagat Saryeh Incorporated, which is a religious nonprofit charitable corporation. As Mr. Manos indicated, Mr. Chairman and board members, this is our second appearance before you as a board. We appeared originally before you at your August meeting 2 months ago. We sought an interpretation with regard to the property that our client is and its benefactors under contract to purchase from the diocese. We are making this application with the specific consent and authorization and knowledge of the diocese who owns the property and supports us in this application. Their counsel is here, and he can speak for the diocese at the appropriate time. Or I should say, their counsel's not here, but the counsel for our benefactors under contract required is here and can speak if he desires to. We presented the proofs, as you recall, Mr. Chairman and board members, with respect to the legal interpretation at the August meeting. The property, of course, is the former St. Nick's School. It was built in the 1920s. It's been vacant for some 10 or 15 years, as you all know. It's located on Chicago Avenue, and our position was and continues to be that in this zoning district, schools are allowed. The land use ordinance, your zoning ordinance, does not contain a definition of what constitutes a school. I full well recognize that when St. Nick's School was there, they did not have sleeping accommodations. But school is a generic term, and it is, was and continues to be our position that the ordinance allows schools generically, and schools can include those with or without dormitories. We propose merely to add dormitories within the existing building. Everything we propose to do will be within the building footprint, with except to maintenance activities outside. When I say maintenance activities, I mean power washing the building, supplementing the landscaping where necessary, seal coating and striping the parking lot if needed, repairing any areas of the fence that may need to be repaired. In essence, bringing the building up to a modern day aesthetic. In terms of interior renovations, we will be doing substantial interior renovations. My client has had experience in doing this before. We know what it takes to do things such as asbestos remediation. Everything interior to the building will be done with full building permit applications being made to your construction official and building permits being obtained in the normal course. So that the application we sought for the interpretation was based on the fact that schools are permitted, and we merely intend to continue another school use, but for those of the Jewish faith rather than those of the Catholic faith and those that intend to become rabbis. Essentially, seminarians is the term utilized generically in the Christian faith. This is and intends to be a seminary for rabbinical students. At the conclusion of that hearing in August, based on the comments we received from you as a board, I asked that the application be tabled. And the application was tabled. We did not withdraw it. We asked it be tabled so that all the proofs we presented at that time, we asked be incorporated into this record. Now, I recognize that there are people here this evening that were not present in August and therefore do not know about the nature of the proposed use. And there are board members that I believe are here tonight that were not here in August and don't know about the nature of the intended use. At the August meeting, I presented the testimony of Rabbi Avi Verschleiser, who was to be the head rabbi. Rabbi Verschleiser had a scheduling conflict this evening. I have one of the assistant rabbis here this evening, Rabbi Zev Spira, who will be presenting some brief testimony, Mr. Chairman. it will largely be consistent with the testimony that Rabbi Verschleiser provided at the August hearing. But it's, again, it's provided to educate those on the board who are not here and to inform those that are in the audience as to the nature of the intended use, since we are now applying in the alternative for a use variance. We don't believe one is needed, but if you should deny our interpretation, we are applying for a use variance. I will also be again presenting the testimony of our planner, Tiffany Morrissey, not as to the interpretation as she did last time. I'm not going to be redundant in that regard. I'm going to be presenting her testimony with respect to the use variance. And the use variance is a very significant part of this application. You as a land use board are an experienced board, I know that. And as you know, to grant a use variance, you have to establish what are known as affirmative criteria and negative criteria. The affirmative criteria is that you have to prove to your satisfaction, you act as a zoning board on this application. You have to prove to your satisfaction that there are something called special reasons that exist. On a general application that does not involve what is known as an inherently beneficial use, and Mr. Manos well knows what an inherently beneficial use is, you have to show that one or more purposes of the Land Use Act would be advanced, okay? But whereas here, you have what's known as an inherently beneficial use, then the affirmative criteria, special reasons, is deemed to have been satisfied. That is to say, the applicant, my client, does not have to prove to your satisfaction that the affirmative criteria is satisfied. Because if you show that this is an inherently beneficial use, that satisfies the special reasons affirmative criteria. And I'll get to the negative criteria in just a moment, okay? And the law says, and this is right out of the municipal land use law, it defines what an inherently beneficial use is. And it specifically said, inherently beneficial use means a use which is universally considered to be of value because it fundamentally serves the public good and promotes the general welfare. And then it gives us examples. It says such uses include, but are not limited to, a hospital, a school, a child care center, group home, or a solar facility, a solar farm, basically. So right in the statute, Mr. Manos knows this well, the word school is utilized as an inherently beneficial use. And the decisional law in this field says, and I've been practicing this field for over 40 years, the decisional law in New Jersey says that if it's a religious school or a public school, it's of no moment. A religious school satisfies the definition of inherently beneficial use under the municipal land use law. So that our position is and will be at the conclusion of this case that as to the use variance, which we're here for this evening, Mr. Chairman and board members, we will have satisfied the affirmative criteria by showing and demonstrating that this is a religious school. It's intended to be a seminary, basically, where those in training to be rabbis are educated. And Rabbi Spiro will talk about, Assistant Rabbi Spiro will talk about that and essentially be redundant with Rabbi Verschleiser's testimony from August. Then the statute says to obtain a use variance, you also have to satisfy the negative criteria. And that is that the variance can be granted without something called substantial detriment to the public good or without substantially impairing the intent and purpose of the zone plan and the zoning ordinance. Well, the New Jersey Supreme Court has handed down a landmark case in the case of SICA, S-I-C-A. Again, Mr. Manos well knows the decision, I know from my experience in other cases with him. SICA says, our New Jersey Supreme Court says, that where you have, as here, an inherently beneficial use, the zoning board must focus only upon the negative criteria. And it must conduct a four-part analysis. And the four-part analysis is, number one, it must look at and identify what the inherently beneficial use is, and establish that the public interest is served by the use. If it's a school, and it's a religious school, it satisfies that criteria. It must identify any, second task of the four-part SECA test is to identify any adverse consequences of granting the use variance. That's what Mr. McGowan's memo deals with, and we'll be prepared to discuss that. The third is factor or criteria in the SECA test is to consider reasonable conditions which might be imposed to mitigate any adverse consequences. We'll be prepared to discuss that as well, and Mr. McGowan's memo addresses that as well. And the last test is to balance the public interest and adverse impact as lessened by the conditions that are to be imposed, and determine whether on balance there would be any substantial detriment to the public good if the variance were to be granted. We believe that this case satisfies clearly and unequivocally the criteria for the grant of the use variance. I recognize that a change in a neighborhood institution that's been there for so many generations causes concern to the neighborhood, and I understand that. And I don't want my remarks this evening to in any way be construed as being critical of the people that may have questions of our use or even be adverse to our use. But I can tell you that our use is recognized as being inherently beneficial, and our use is one that is protected by federal law. And it's protected by federal law known as RLUIPA. That's the acronym. It stands for the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Purposes Act. It was passed during the Clinton administration in the early 90s. And it basically says that if there is, and I'm not saying there is or will be, I'm just stating what the law is, if there is discrimination in administration of land use laws against a religious organization, and there is a contest, that not only is the remedy reversal of that decision, but the remedy is a fee shifting. The attorney's fees are awarded against the municipalities, and the damages are awarded against the municipalities. That's just, this is a rare case where the normal case I bring before land use boards such as you, we have only state law considerations. This has state law considerations, and this has federal law considerations overlapping the state law considerations. Our testimony will be relatively brief, Mr. Chairman and board members. I want to first produce Rabbi Spira, Assistant Rabbi Spira, and then Tiffany Morrissey for some brief testimony. I have them both sworn at this time, please.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
And from a procedural perspective, we'll let the applicant present their case, and we'll open up to the public. When we go to the public, we'll let any attorneys speak first, and then every other member of the public will speak after. But Rabbi, if you could just state your name and spell it, please.
Zev Spira, Z-E-V-S-P-I-R-A.
And Tiffany for the record.
Morrissey, Tiffany Morrissey, Morrissey.
Can you each raise your right hand? Do you each swear affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
I do.
Yes.
Thank you.
Rabbi, would you take the witness stand over here for a moment? Your full name, please, for the record, Rabbi.
Zev Spira, Z-E-V-S-P-I-R-A.
And Rabbi, what is your affiliation with the applicant? And that is to say, Yeshiva Shargas Aryeh Incorporated.
Yes, I'm an assistant rabbi, and I'm involved in operations of the school as well.
Okay, keep your voice up, as Mr. Manis said, so we can all hear clearly, okay? Okay, and you're familiar with the operations of the nonprofit corporation?
Yes, I'm very familiar, and I was involved in constructing as well.
Involved in its formation?
Information and the construction of some of the facilities. We have 2 facilities.
Okay. Now, is the applicant Yeshiva Shargas Aryeh, is it a charitable nonprofit corporation?
That is correct.
And it's registered with the state of New Jersey and the federal government as such?
That is correct.
And you operate existing yeshiva, well, strike that. Rabbi, tell us what a yeshiva is as it relates to this application, just generically, not here, apply.
Yeshiva in general is called a school. That's how we call it in Hebrew. So the yeshiva is elementary, is high school, and then there's post-high school. In our case, we're discussing a post-high school program which when high school finishes, which is approximately 18 years old, there are a group of kids that go to work, and then there's the more elite kids that want to become a rabbi, or they want to continue their education, will join the seminary.
Okay.
Which
And
is-
that's the type of facility you intend to here operate, correct?
That's correct.
So you intend to educate students, male students?
Male students from 18 years old to 21 approximately, it's 3
Right.
years. And basically, there is a big demand of, because they want to be they're older kids and they want to be very intense in their studies, they want to be away from home.
Okay. Now, tell us, Rabbi, if you would, do you operate any similar facilities in any other communities?
Yes,
And you have one in Hamilton, New Jersey, Hamilton, Mercer County, not Hamilton, Atlantic County, correct?
correct.
And that's located at 109 Route 156?
That is correct.
And-
We opened that facility approximately 3 years ago. A similar case, because it's also in a non-area that people have parents there. It's the same sort of operation, and we're extremely successful.
Okay, and approximately how many students do you have at that facility, as you recall?
About 100 students,
Okay, and it's been in operation for how many years?
3 years, starting
And
the
did
fourth
you-
year now.
You took an existing building and renovated it there as well?
Actually, the same exact story, an old school from, I forget which Christian or some school, same story, they sold it, and we did the same exact thing, that facility in Hamilton,
Okay, and you operate that today?
correct.
And it's been in continuous operation since you renovated it approximately 3 years ago?
Renovation's actually longer, we started occupying it approximately 3 years ago, which now it's starting the fourth year, correct,
And now it's on its 4th year?
correct.
Okay, and you have another facility at 975 Cross Street, correct?
That's not the same, that's not the seminary operation, that's more the high school operation.
Okay. And tell us about the one in Hamilton. Has it been a successful operation
Very
for your
successful.
corporation, your charitable corporation?
Very successful, and I think we had the same story like we had here. It was different neighbors, and we brought it to their attention, and we did show exactly what we're doing. I would say today we are probably the best neighbors they ever had.
Okay. And do you have any complaints from the township or from your neighbors about the operation?
Actually, none. We had actually a tour a few months ago. Township officials, they came by, they were extremely impressed with how everything is up to code and everything is so on the up and up, as we say.
Okay. Now, Rabbi, you're under, you and your benefactor under contract to buy the property that's the subject of this application, correct?
That is correct.
And you're making this application with the full consent, support, and authorization of the diocese, which, through its various entities, owns the property, correct?
That is correct.
Now, your ability to buy the property is contingent on your being able to utilize it for your intended use, correct?
That is correct.
Now, tell us, Rabbi, approximately how many students would you anticipate you would have in this facility?
We think we would start with 75, and the most we would put probably, just because the way the architect laid out the building, I don't think we can max out above 90.
About
But
90.
again, that should be reviewed based on the construction code officials.
Okay,
what
and
the
these,
architect allows.
right, and these would be, your architect would obviously meet with the construction official and obtain all permits, and see that all, demolition work and all construction permits were obtained in the normal course and through the appropriate legal channels.
That is correct.
Now, Rabbi, you, if I understood your testimony correctly, you intend to educate male students 18 to 21 years of age,
That is correct.
and they are trained to become rabbis.
They become rabbis, correct.
And in the lay parlance, in the American world, we might call it a seminary, correct?
We call it seminary as well.
Okay. Now, Rabbi, tell us about the course of the day. What the students do, how they're educated, what happens in the school.
So for starters, most of the boys that join this facility are extremely disciplined children, because they don't have to come. It's not high school, it's post-seminary, it's post-high school. So we're talking about a group of young men which are very disciplined. They want to really get their, it's called smicha. Smicha is like a license to be a rabbi, so these are very intense kids. Intense to the,
That's the Hebrew term.
smicha is
Smicha is
the
Hebrew word meaning license to be practiced,
You practice
a rabbi.
To the point that they run a very organized schedule, because in order to fit into the program and continue the program, you have to be very disciplined. So you're talking about, there's a morning prayer in the morning, I would say a 7:30 morning prayer. I would say then there's breakfast, and there's like a session from 9 to 1:30. There's a session with different teachers teaching them the Talmud. Then I would say there's a lunch break. There will be sports. They just play basketball if they want to. Some of the group, not everybody does, but there's a group of kids that will do a little sports. I would say they go back to the next afternoon studies, which starts about 4 o'clock till 6:30. Then there's a mincha prayer, as you know, like a middle day prayer. I would say then there is a course of dinner. And then there is at night another an hour and a half of continuing study. And then these kids usually go early sleeping because you're talking about the next morning, they're back in business.
Okay.
They want to continue the intense program.
Right. And how many days a week is that protocol followed, Rabbi?
It's Sunday through Thursday. And Friday, as we all know, Sabbath comes in, which, if I want, I should collaborate what Sabbath is. I don't know if everybody knows yet what Sabbath is, but Sabbath is basically nobody drives, nobody does anything. So basically, we shut down for everything. So Friday afternoon, everybody gets ready for the Sabbath, and then Sabbath they'll run a Sabbath program, which means no driving, no cell phones, no, I don't know, the board knows too much about Sabbath. I can elaborate, but Sabbath is a day of rest. Nobody does anything, and therefore there's no movement. Everything's quiet. You have to stay where you are. And then Saturday night, they have probably another learning program. And then we start again the week, Sunday.
Okay, and Sunday you begin studies again?
Sunday again, Sunday through Thursday, the regular studies, correct.
Okay, and does the regimen continue all year round? I take it there's breaks periodically during
That
the
is
course
correct.
of the year.
That is
Explain
correct.
that.
We have the big holidays everybody knows, Passover. I'm sure you guys know about Passover. But Passover is not only the 10 days that everybody goes home to their family, it's also, let's call it 5 days before Passover and 5 days. It's called, the Hebrew term, it's called Ben Hazmanim, which means between period, like a semester, like a break. So that's like, I would call it almost 3.5 weeks, or close even sometimes 4 weeks. That's a break that everybody leaves. And the school closes down. And then they come back right after the holiday to start again the next semester. That's semester number 1. And then there's another one of Sukkot, which is right after Yom Kippur. So the school usually stays open for Yom Kippur. And then right after Yom Kippur is another 2 to 3 week break that people go home to their families.
And that usually is October of the
That's
English
October.
calendar.
The other one is usually like March.
March or April.
March or April.
Right.
Depending
Okay,
on
so,
the Jewish calendar.
right, and the Jewish calendar is of course a lunar calendar, the English calendar is not. But generally, they coincide to October for Sukkot, when there's a break, as you mentioned, and March or April, and Passover when there's another break, correct? And does the studies continue in the summer?
Summer, they do have a 2 weeks break as well, actually.
Okay.
Another 2 week break as well. But sometimes, depending on which group of boys came, sometimes they do a summer program. So I wouldn't say it's the same schools, it's a summer program within the school, whoever wants to be.
And when they go home, they go home to their families
They go home
during
to
these
their
breaks.
families.
And most of the families reside in the Lakewood area, would that be accurate?
Not necessarily, because this is a very elite educational, intense seminary. You'll have people from upstate New York, you'll have from Brooklyn, New York, we have people from Pittsburgh, we have people from LA. It's a very group of parents, and these people are to get into the school is extremely hard because we vet every single student. We're not just taking students, especially if not needed. Like every high school, every kid needs to go to high school. But this is like a voluntary program. It's a seminary program.
So it's a rigorous application process?
Very hard application to get in because the rabbis want to prove that these kids are fit for this intense program.
Now, tell us, do the students drive? They don't drive, do they?
The students don't drive.
Okay, and you have faculty that teaches the student, obviously.
Correct.
And you have maintenance people that help in the building and help with cooking and cleaning, correct?
Correct.
How big a faculty do you have and how big of a maintenance staff would you anticipate at this location?
We would say at any given time in the building, we shouldn't have more than 6 people, which means in the morning I'll have 6 people and some of them will leave. In the afternoon, somebody else will replace that person. So I don't see having more than 6 staff members at any time in the building.
Okay, and we are asking, you'd like to have parking on site for, as Rabbi Verschleiser told us at the last meeting, about 10 or 12 cars,
That is
just to have a belt and suspenders, just in case you have to enhance the staff. Is that correct?
I believe that currently we have there's some parking spots incorporated on the site.
I'm sorry, was that wrong?
I believe last time I went to visit it, I believe there is some parking spots on site now.
Well, there's a big paved area. I don't know that it's all striped, but it could readily be striped, clearly.
Correct.
Okay, because it's can house many more parking spaces than 10 or 12. And you intend to, in terms of the interior of the building, you intend to totally renovate that, correct?
That's correct. Now, believe it or not, there's some areas which are custom made for Mr. Medvish, which is called the main hall, the big room. But like my architect says, this goes with the Uniform Council code in the state of New Jersey.
Keep your voice up.
So,
It may be May, it's probably May.
basically, this goes with the building department of Egg Harbor City. Basically, we follow the code.
Okay, so if there's asbestos in the building, you know that that has to be remediated in accordance with very stringent remedial processes, correct?
That is correct.
And have you had experience in doing that?
Many times.
Now, with respect to the, there's a basketball court outside, I take it you're gonna repair that so that there's some ability for recreation outside?
That is correct.
And with respect to the facility, it's licensed by the state of New Jersey,
That is correct.
and that's the Department of Education?
Yes.
And your other facilities are also so licensed, are
That
they
is
not?
correct.
And with regard to the facility here, Rabbi, you would acknowledge that if the board were to act to grant a use variance, you know that variance would only authorize your use as a religious training center, yeshiva, for rabbinical training, or a seminary for rabbinical students, correct?
That is correct.
And that would be acceptable to you and your organization?
100%.
And would you agree to abide by a reasonable condition which would require that no students be able to drive? Would you agree to a condition that no students would be able to drive?
I could agree to that.
And would-
I always feel, I deal with many boards, I always feel that if something changes, you always come back to the board and you discuss it. But for now, we definitely don't have that.
no, we don't. You don't anticipate that. You don't have that at any of your other schools, do you?
That is correct.
And you're familiar with other yeshivas that are not operated by your corporation, your charitable corporation, are you not?
Yes, very familiar.
And you're familiar with other seminaries such as yours?
That is correct.
And do students at those seminaries typically drive?
Not in our communities. The typical, in other words, the one who I'm catering to, this type of group of people that I'm catering, they don't let drive. In fact, I have a son that's in Yeshiva South Fallsburg, which is a very big seminary.
Where?
Yeshiva South Fallsburg in New York. And I remember signing, guys signed the paperwork. I just had to sign that he's not going to drive.
Okay.
It was like one of the big factors of accepting him, like make sure he doesn't drive.
Okay. And
We're very strict about it, and for a simple reason, if I could elaborate a little bit. The reason is because they want intensity of the kids to grow in their studies. The second they have a car, they kind of lose focus. I'm gonna say something to the board, if it's okay. They don't even allowed to have cell phones. My son is in yeshiva now, and they're not allowed to have cell phones. For the same reason. They don't want distraction, they don't want to have connection to anything but focusing on the studies.
I think we all know what a distraction cell phone is. We see 4 young kids out having a meal and they're all looking at their cell phones. Nobody's talking to each other, so we all kind of see that and experience that. Rabbi, the construction to renovate the building, how long do you think it will take?
Feeling we have a very good construction crew. I don't think it'll take more than 6 months to a year to do the job.
Okay. And if approval is granted, you intend to diligently close title and move forward to renovate the building in accordance with duly obtained permits from
That
the
is correct.
construction official's office?
That is correct.
Okay. The course of study, Rabbi, is there anything about it that you've neglected to tell us or that I've neglected to ask you inadvertently that you think should be mentioned?
Not at all. I think if they would actually, that's what happened to Hamilton. I think if the board or any construction official comes in, they would be quite impressed that you see 90 children sitting there and disciplined and sitting by the Gemara. You know, it's like a big book. And they're sitting with the Chavrusa, that's what it's called, basically a partner. They're both studying the Talmud. And they're sitting there from 9, I did it myself, and I can't believe I did it. From 9:30 till 2 o'clock, straight, sitting there listening to lectures and just disciplined. No cell phones, no cars, no nothing, just sitting there
Undivided
growing.
attention.
And that's why the Hamilton neighborhood is like really impressed, because they don't see, you don't have any outside craziness, you don't have children, you know, doing crazy stuff, because the children that we anticipate bringing there are extremely disciplined, and their parents wouldn't send them out of town only if they trust that their child will succeed in the out-of-town environment.
Right. And I take it therefore, Rabbi, it's a very quiet land use.
Very, very quiet.
Now, obviously, you're going to renovate the kitchen. You observe the rules of kashrut, kosher.
That's correct.
That will have to be a totally renovated kitchen, correct?
Correct.
And how about deliveries? How many deliveries do you anticipate you'd have? You're going to have deliveries by, food vendors periodically and paper suppliers, I take it,
I
periodically.
would say now we have once a week of delivering, maybe twice maximum.
Okay. So you have 1 or 2 deliveries maximum a week?
Correct, because you're not gonna, it's not enough of water, you can't deliver every day a little bit. The big truck shows up, he drops everything off, which is paper goods or food or whatnot, and everything gets cooked on facilities. So.
Right, and if you need something in a pinch, in an instant, in an emergent nature, you have somebody you can dispense to run to the store to acquire paper products or something you may need, correct?
That is correct.
Now, Rabbi, you've talked about the education. You've talked about studying the Talmud. To the non-Jews in the room, they associate Judaism with the Torah, and you talked about the Talmud. Explain to us, Rabbi, the difference, because from a lay perspective, those who are not Jewish, I've found, to think that Jewish law is the Torah. Explain the difference and how one interrelates to the other.
Torah is basically the Bible, as we all know, and Talmud is what's written much later, the New Testament, or from Talmuds, from the Babylonians that wrote up different, it's called, in Hebrew it's called Torah Shabbat Peh, that wasn't in writing. This was spiritual people that gave over what the Bible meant. And basically this was written up, and that's what we study, and that's how we take out how we should institute halacha, which means what we should actually do, what actually practice Jewish law.
Right. So the Torah is actually the 5 books of the Old Testament.
Correct.
And the Talmud is the commentaries through the years that religious sages have handed down, which have been reduced to writing and which are studied by those seeking to become rabbis.
You're saying better than I could say.
Okay, well,
You should become the rabbi.
no, I just, do I understand you correctly?
Much better than I explained it, yes.
No, okay. I don't think there are any other questions, Rabbi. Are there any questions from the board? We'd be happy to attempt to answer. Go ahead.
During the breaks of school, are the children made to go home? They have to go home? Will they occupy the school at all? Any of them?
Usually they go home if they wanna go home to their parents. Sometimes if some of them came from Israel or from other countries, they will maybe keep, I remember when I was that age, they will keep like a small little group that stay there because they don't wanna go home. But the Hamilton yeshiva, they all go home, they close down totally.
Okay, but you don't know how this is gonna work then, until.
I would say they go home. You know, I'm going back 20 years ago, when I was that age, tickets were expensive, people don't wanna travel, so they stayed. Today's day and age, I would say they would go home.
Or they will visit another student's parents if they live there.
Or visit an uncle. They wouldn't
Yeah, I'm
stay.
just interested whether the school's empty at that time.
The school's empty. And we use it for maintenance sometimes also.
And if they stay, is there staff that stays with them?
Definitely, and that's why I'm saying it's probably not gonna happen, because the staff is not gonna stay there. We don't leave students unattended without staff. By the way, that's a good point, which I guess you brought up.
Those students are never left
Never
unattended.
left it unattended, never. It doesn't happen, it doesn't exist. The parents wouldn't allow it, the school wouldn't, it just wouldn't work. We always have, the worst, if it's not a rabbi, a dorm counselor. It doesn't happen, that the children live alone ever.
Any other board members?
Is there gonna be any school buses?
Absolutely not,
No buses.
no buses. Reason being is because they don't live locally, they're being bussed in. They usually come to the car and they're dropped off by a parent, or they'll do a carpool together. They'll show up and then they'll stay there for whatever, you know, a period of time. I did forget to mention one thing, that they do go home, besides the big breaks that I mentioned, the 3 breaks that I mentioned, they sometimes do go home, like once every 6 weeks, they'll go home just for Shabbos, just for the weekend. So they'll leave Friday at 12 o'clock, leave and then come back for Sunday.
Parents pick them up or?
And so they drive together, like they take a little carpool together.
There's one other thing we neglected to mention, which I recall now that Rabbi Schleiser did mention. Once or twice a year, you may have a party at the school, correct?
Right.
There are Jewish holidays in your faith, in the Jewish faith, such as Hanukkah, help me, Rabbi. Purim, thank you, where those are the 2 times when you may have a party at the school.
That is correct.
And at those times, might you see a few parents come that may live close by?
It happens. Occasion. Sometimes the school has like a PTA. I think the parties are not so with the school.
Okay.
I don't think the parents come so much to the party, but the rule can be, that we should have mentioned it maybe, once a year, like as a PTA, the parents would come.
Once a year, what, Rabbi?
That we have a PTA, that parents would come check up on their children.
Okay,
Today, you know, with COVID, they're living on the phones, I don't know, you know.
right.
It's more.
Thank you. Any further questions, Mr. Chairman?
Any other board members? Rabbi, does your Hamilton facility have dormitories?
Yes.
And I know that it's not under the jurisdiction of the board for anything inside of the facility, and I realize that, but just a couple of questions, if you would share. Obviously, you've had an architect look at the inside of the building, and you feel that, or your professional feels that there's enough room in that building
That is correct.
to do everything that you want to do with classrooms and dormitories,
Right.
and I'm sure he understands the magnitude of the renovations that will need to be undertaken.
Shower rooms, bathrooms, all that good stuff.
These, Mr. Chairman, just so you know, we anticipate these will be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not more.
I think it's gonna be, based on what I think, it's gonna be close to $2 million, that's what I think.
Okay. And I also want to stress.
And I'm doing it also because otherwise the students won't come. Today's day and age, you show them an old shack, nobody's coming, it has to be up to 2022.
Well, it's admirable that you're taking a historic building and repurposing it rather than tearing it down.
And I'll be honest, even though the reason why we like this building, besides the building, we did a little research, the town is very quiet, and these kids, that's why Hamilton's so successful, they do very well when it's quiet. They don't need distractions, we don't want them. This seminary, these 3 years, they thrive under quiet, organized area. We don't want them in the city where there's a lot of shopping, we don't want them there, we want them, no cell phone, no car, just study. And if you can't put up with it, you don't have to join the school. It's a very specialty item, school. I painted the picture right.
Thank you.
One other point I wanted to make, Mr. Chairman, board members, is that the construction code, it's not a board determination, but I want everybody to know that the construction code also determines how much space you need per person to occupy a building. So that the architects are well familiar with that. Rabbi, you've reviewed that with your architect and believe
right.
that the maximum load could be, up to 90 students, correct?
Technically, we could fit them more, but we don't want to fit more. We
Right.
want to have it up and just.
Okay, so I just want the board and everyone to know in this room that the occupancy loads are regulated by the construction code laws and regulations.
Yeah, just a question I think would benefit the board, sort of related to something right as we transition to the questions
Sure.
was, staffing, your overnight staffing. Do you have, is there somebody that lives or staff that lives at the facility?
Yes.
Or is there, okay.
There will be some, we call it a dormitory counselor. That's what we call it. Usually one person staying overnight. Definitely. Like we said, we never have the building unattended.
Well, that's, you mentioned there's never unattended, so I don't know if there was
Never.
overnight staff, if there was someone that lived at the facility full-time, how that was handled.
Usually it's an older single, like a graduate, somebody that's graduated and they would stay there full time.
Now, Rabbi Versleiser also mentioned that sometimes after they study at the yeshiva, they also study in Israel before they're receive their certification.
That is correct. From here, this 21 years old, they go to Israel, they go to the huge, big college in Jerusalem. Then they come back, but when they come back, they usually don't go back to the seminary. They would go to a much larger seminary like Lakewood.
Then they're out practicing the rabbit.
Exactly.
They're practicing
You
the
know,
rabbit.
a school that has over 3,500 people, not, this is a very secluded, small little group. They want to give the attention that they need, hands-on, it's a different, it's a very specialized group and mission.
Thank you, Rabbi. Anything else, Mr. Chairman?
Can we open it up to the public if the rabbi shows?
Well,
Or did
I
you
have my
need-
planner. Well, Rabbi, I'll be glad to answer any questions from the members of the public. Just might work better if I can let my planner testify, then they'll both be open to questions.
Great.
Would that be all right?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Marcy, would you come forward? Your full name for the record?
Tiffany Morrissey,
Spell your last name if you would.
Morrissey.
And what is your occupation?
I'm a licensed professional planner,
And your license in the state of New Jersey?
state of New Jersey, as well as a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners.
Now, your certification as a planner from the American Institute of Certified Planners is the highest licensing agency for planners nationally. Is that correct?
Correct.
And how long have you been a member of that organization?
21 years?
And how long have you been licensed in the state of New Jersey as a planner?
At least 21 years. I think I had 3 years prior to that as a planner in training, so 24 years.
Okay, and could you tell us a little bit about your experience in planning in New Jersey, both on the public side and on the private side?
Yes, I have represented various municipalities throughout New Jersey as their board and township or municipal planner. I was also employed by the Township of Galloway as their planner for about 13 years. I have also represented various clients throughout New Jersey before boards like this in almost, I want to say about 13 different counties throughout New Jersey, and if I count the municipalities, it would be pretty high. And I've prepared ordinances, master plans, reviews of variances, redevelopment plans, housing elements, you name it. I've done that kind of work for planning as a professional planner.
And have you been accepted as an expert, a licensed professional planner before land use boards in the state of New Jersey?
Yes, I have.
We have 565 municipalities in New Jersey. I suspect you've never counted how many you've appeared before, but could you give us a rough approximation of how many boards you've been accepted by as licensed, as an expert in professional planning?
I would say close to 100.
Okay, and that's in your 20-year career, correct?
Yes, correct.
And I offer as an expert, Mr. Chairman, I think there's no objection.
Marcy's qualifications.
Thank you. And again, Mr. Chairman, I'll be redundant in saying we're incorporating all of Ms. Morrissey's testimony from the interpretation. I'm not repeating it herein because we're not presenting the interpretation again. It's already been presented. I want to go on to the use variance proofs from a planning perspective. Ms. Morrissey, you're familiar with the property in question, are you not?
Very familiar.
How is it that you've become familiar with the property?
Well, I did attend CCD there when I was a younger child, but I've also lived in the area, and my family's lived in the area, and I've been around the property many times, plus I visited it in terms of redoing it for what we're looking to do with this application.
Okay, so would I be accurate in saying that you're fully familiar with the property in question and the surrounding area generally and the pertinent provisions of this community's Land Use Act ordinance as it affects this property?
Yes.
And are you familiar, Ms. Morrissey, with the strictures that govern the guidance provided for zoning boards in handling inherently beneficial uses?
Yes, I am.
And do you have an opinion, within a reasonable degree of planning certainty and probability, as to whether this use is an inherently beneficial use, and if so, why?
Yes, I believe this is in fact an inherently beneficial use for several reasons. First and foremost, as you read from the statute in your introduction, Mr. Nemag, the municipal land use law specifically states that schools are an inherently beneficial use. Add to that the religious component and the trainings of what we just talked about with the rabbi. It adds an additional level of providing an inherently beneficial use, because while churches and religious activities are not specifically named under an inherently beneficial use, they have been determined to be so through various case law and enhanced through other aspects of governing regulations.
Would I be accurate in saying, Ms. Morrissey, that the planning profession in New Jersey and the planning law in New Jersey has always recognized the attending to the spiritual needs of human beings through religious organizations as being inherently beneficial?
Yes, they have.
And according to, you've heard the rabbi's testimony, have you not?
Yes, I have.
Tonight.
Yes.
And you heard Rabbi Verschleiser's testimony at the August hearing,
Yes,
did
I
you
did.
not? And based on their testimony, I take it, you formed your opinion, applying the law as you know it to their testimony that's been given, that this is an inherently beneficial use. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and in an inherently beneficial use, from a planning perspective, in your opinion, does the applicant need to establish any further proof with respect to the affirmative criteria or special reasons for a use variance?
Under the positive criteria, if you are in fact considered an inherently beneficial use, that is all that you must satisfy for the positive criteria. You don't need to go into the enhanced analysis of other purposes of zoning, because an inherently beneficial use basically is the highest beneficial aspect of the principles of planning and purposes of the land use law.
And therefore, from a planning perspective, the affirmative criteria or special reasons is deemed to be satisfied because the use is an inherently beneficial one, correct?
Correct.
Now, as you well know, the board also focuses in the consideration of use variances on what is known as a negative criteria. Are you familiar with how, from a planning perspective, the courts have instructed you to analyze the negative criteria as it applies to an inherently beneficial use such as that here proposed?
Yes, I am familiar.
Tell us how you've analyzed it and what conclusions you've come to.
So for the inherently beneficial use, there is basically a four-part test. It's the SICA balancing test. The first
SICA is S-I-C-A.
SICA, and that is as put through by the courts. When you have an inherently beneficial use, you have to deal with four parts in terms of addressing and balancing the benefits of the use versus the potential impacts from the use and providing appropriate conditions. That analysis is actually written out in your planner's report, but I'm going to go through it with you as well. The first is to evaluate the public interest served by the inherently beneficial use. In this instance, we've already heard about that public interest, That public interest is related to providing education to for students that are interested in learning more about becoming a rabbi. It is a post-high school type education. It is specialized for a certain group of males that are who are interested in learning more and pursuing their life as a rabbi. It's also, because of that, is tied to a religious aspect, and Mr. Neum had mentioned the Religious Institute or Land Use RELUPA. And I'm not going to get the whole acronym right, so I just like to say RELUPA. But I'm mentioning that because that shows that there is special protection and extra enhancement and concern as to how inherently beneficial and a religious aspect use is. And this use is a combination of school and religion, as you heard, because it's religious teachings, it's like a college, in essence, but for learning the Jewish religion to become a rabbi. So you put those two together, you have two highly beneficial uses, and that public interest that is served, to me, is really high on that scale of how inherently beneficial and what the public interest is that's being served. The second step in that in the SECA balancing test is to identify any adverse consequences of granting the variance. So if you approve this, what are the adverse consequences? And when you look at that, you have to look at not just what the impacts are from this use, but what the property is allowed to be used for. And you do that generally under a negative criteria analysis when you have a use variance. What is permitted in the zone, what can happen in the zone, and how is this different from what can happen, and what are the potential impacts? Your ordinance this is an R9 zone, and it permits a variety of uses in the R9 zone that are similar to what we're requesting this evening. The R9 zone permits schools, it permits places of worship, it also permits government buildings, and it permits various conditional uses, including medical complexes, nursing home, or convalescence center. Those uses have a combination of all the things that we're proposing here. This is in fact a school, but the school has the dormitories associated with it because they will be staying at the facility, which is similar to where you have a nursing home or a convalescent home. You're not necessarily taking care of people, but you have people living on the property. And you have that religious aspect that goes with the place of worship. So you have three different uses in your zone. They're very similar to what we're proposing here. It's just not specifically listed to have schools with dormitories. Dormitories are accessory to some schools, and that goes back to our prior August application, which I don't want to get into a lot of detail on. But in essence, this is similar to other uses. Schools have different types of traffic patterns, and you have school buses on a daily basis. They're not open year-round necessarily, but some schools can be open year-round. So you have with summer activities in summer schools. So you have more activity from a traditional school, as this facility has operated in the past, than you may from what we are proposing, where once the students are at the school, there is no leaving the facility. There's no daily in, daily out. They're there and they stay there besides when they go home for break or if they go home for a weekend once every few weeks. In addition to that, you have the medical complex and the nursing home and the convalescent home, which are also permitted uses, albeit conditional uses, which have a different level of activity associated with them. And in this instance, our activity, as you heard from the rabbi in his testimony, is very minimal. For instance, our deliveries are 1 to 2 times per week to provide supplies and food for the students. We have about 6 employees at one time in the building and no more than 90 students. When this operated as a school and had the ancillary activities supporting the church, there was a greater amount of both staff and students, although not on a year-round basis on the property, on a daily activity. So when we identify what the possible adverse consequences are from granting the variance, in my professional opinion, when you look at that in relationship to what else is permitted in the zone, or how the site has operated, and it hasn't operated, I believe, since prior to 2007, so it's been a very long time. But the activities that were permitted or were occurring on this property could be considered much more intense than what is proposed with the activities that we have, short of the fact that we would have overnight stay and 24-hour operation in the facility. The reasonable conditions can be considered, and that's part 3. Consider conditions which might be imposed to mitigate any adverse consequences. So provide you an understanding of how the school will operate with up to about 90 students and no more than about 6 staff at one time. We are anticipating providing you with an understanding of how the site operates. We also have provided that testimony in terms of how the studies occur in the property, that there are no students that drive to the property, which is important because there's no parking necessary, no substantial parking area. You don't have people in and out on a daily basis. So under a use variance, the information that we're providing to you can be incorporated into reasonable conditions to mitigate any possible adverse consequences. And that's why we provided that in-depth testimony as to how the site operates and what is proposed on this property. The fourth part of the balancing and the SEQA balancing test is to balance the public interest in granting the variance versus the adverse impact as lessened by any conditions imposed by the board, and determine whether on balance there would be a substantial detriment to the public good if the variance were granted. As part of this analysis and part of the negative criteria, which isn't specifically stated because we still have to address, is there a substantial impairment of your zoning ordinance and zone plan or your master plan, and is there a substantial detriment to the public good? And then balance that against providing those reasonable conditions and the overall public benefit that's afforded this use on this property. I want to talk a little bit about your master plan and how the zoning ordinance is not substantially impaired and how the master plan addresses this property in terms of what may or may not be appropriate. And that's important because we want to demonstrate to you that not only there is no adverse impact from how the use operates, but that there's no substantial impairment of your master plan and your zoning ordinance. The site itself has operated, as you know, as a school for many, many, many years. So the change of the school to have students living there is the main difference. But because it's still a school, it's still not impairing the intent of your zoning ordinance. Your master plan talks about this site. It talked about this site back in 2010 and considered providing, I'll actually read to you from what the master plan said in 2010. The St. Nicholas School is now closed and the building is appropriate for adaptive reuse. Private education such as a preschool may be proposed but will require variance relief or a zoning amendment. Congregate housing has been discussed, which would require variance relief, a zone amendment, or a redevelopment plan to allow conversion from a school to multifamily housing. So your master plan recognized that there was a need for some different type of use on this property, an adaptive reuse. They didn't want to see the building go. They wanted to provide, that's what the adaptive reuse, in my professional opinion, means when that was stated in the master plan. They wanted to provide an opportunity to reuse the building. That was in 2010 that was written, and it was already closed for 3 years. It is now 2021, and the school still is sitting empty. We're here tonight trying to provide an opportunity for a reuse of the school with the housing of the students, which is kind of what the master plan is talking about, a combination of a school or some type of housing, congregate housing. So this kind of advances what the master plan was looking at as an appropriate adaptive reuse for this property. Not something that you would necessarily put in your master plan that we're going to have a yeshiva here teaching 18 to 21-year-olds, because it's not something you would just think that would happen in a general case, and not many towns would have an ordinance that would permit something like that. But here, I think this provides that adaptive reuse that is appropriate for this building, therefore not substantially impairing what was intended in your master plan and highlighted in your master plan, and also representing many of the uses that are already permitted in the R9 district, and respecting the building that has existed for many, many years as part of the community and gets to get cleaned up and remain in the community. So when we take that and put that together, that it's not a substantial impairment of your zoning ordinance or a substantial detriment or an impairment of your master plan, I think you can also find that there's no substantial detriment to the public good. In terms of what that detriment would be to the public good with a 24-hour operation, because students are living there. You're not having outdoor activity. You're not having multiple vehicles on the property where they're going to the grocery store or the movies or out. They're not driving. They don't even have cell phones, as the rabbi indicated. So you have people that are there, students that are there, just to study their religious studies in order to further their ability to become a rabbi later. In my professional opinion, when you take that overall inherently beneficial use aspect, the public good application. Look at those consequences that are potential from this application and compare them not just to what we're proposing, from what we're proposing to do, compare them to what was permitted to occur there and what has occurred there. While it may be more activity than has been on the property since 2007, it's not going to be more activity than was on the property before 2007, just different activity. And it will not be more activity than what would be permitted for other uses if they were to try to use this property. In fact, some other uses may not be able to save the building, and we would lose that aspect of the community, which has stood forever at that location and is kind of a landmark with the open area around it, giving that open space to the community of Egg Harbor City. I remember running across the fields from church and then going to CCD, and then we would walk and get to McDonald's, and so that whole open area and that whole area existing and remaining because we're able to adaptively reuse this building for an inherently beneficial use, in my professional opinion, is really quintessential to what you look for when you have an application that is considered potentially a use variance. To find something that preserves the area of the community, what they're used to having in that area, and balance that against what the benefits are to the community. And I think that you can say that the positives substantially outweigh the detriments.
Ms. Marcy, in your opinion, is this building architecturally, significant? I mean, the master plan recognizes it, such, right?
Yes.
And from a planning perspective, now put aside the master plan, which you quoted so specifically and artfully from in your testimony, is the adaptive reuse of architecturally significant buildings something that's to be advanced? Is it a positive planning goal?
Yes, in fact, there is actually a purpose of the municipal land use law to promote the conservation of historic sites and districts, and that this is not necessarily historic property as listed on any registry, but it is historic to Egg Harbor City and to those of us who grew up in the area. And to protect that and to keep that and to maintain that building and have that same visual, to me, advances that purpose of zoning.
Okay, and Ms. Marcy, as you know, any land use has impacts. Humans living and functioning create impacts when they utilize buildings and structures. But in your opinion, is with the grant of the use variance, in any meaningful way, could it in any rational way be said to create a substantial negative impact? And I emphasize the word substantial because that's what the case law, the New Jersey Supreme Court has said is the word that must be emphasized. Is there any substantial impact, in your professional opinion, which could rationally be found to exist if this use variance were to be granted?
You're right, Steve. Substantial is the key word because anything that's different is going to have some kind of impact. But does it rise to that level of being so substantial to change what was otherwise intended or could happen on that property? In my professional opinion, the proposed use on this property does not rise to that level of being so substantial to outweigh those benefits. It is not substantial when compared to what was allowed to occur on sites under the prior use. It is not substantial compared to what could occur under the existing zoning.
Thank you, Ms. Marcy. No further questions from the chairman. She's open to questions, as is the rabbi from the board or anyone else.
Any board members? Facade of the building, the outside of the building, will that change in any way?
Well, we're going to clean it, and I believe there may be a cross on the top of the building. Obviously, that has to be removed. But I think both front facades have a cross on the top. That's going to be removed. Other than that, it's just going to be power washed and cleaned.
No, we do like the structure, we do like the historic structure. And actually, in fact, was involved in this building in the past, and that we won the award for historic district. Wasn't the yeshiva, it was different opportunity and all. So we're very familiar. We do like that structure look, and we do think that if we power wash it and areas maybe need paint, I think that's going to bring out, and like Ms. Marcy mentioned, I think it'll be like an historic landmark for people that grew up there.
I just asked because the last time you guys were here, you brought an interior drawing, but there was never a drawing of the outside of the building.
We're not changing it. I mean, we're just, the only thing we have to remove, obviously, is the religious signification.
Any other board members? Can we open it to the public?
Let's take public input, comment, question.
questions, and do you want to coordinate it? or-
I think we understand the report mirrors
Yeah.
Marcy's.
I think, Mr. Chairman, we should ask.
Mr. Farrell, Mike Farrell, I live across the street from the school.
1 second, Mr. Farrell, okay? You're gonna get your chance. Typically, in my experience, sometimes we let, not necessarily, but sometimes you let the attorneys go first. It might speed the process up a little bit, because some questions might get answered during that. So I know at least one attorney's here representing someone. We'll go to the public, we'll call them first, and then we just take members of the public one at a time.
I apologize, Mr. Farrell.
We'll get to you.
You're opening the public portion now?
Open the
Yes.
public portion, and Mr. Manos recommends that we let any attorney speak first.
Hello, I'm Jenna Cook, I represent Joe and Stephanie Keener, they live at 459 Chicago Avenue.
I'm sorry, who do you represent, Jen?
Joseph and Stephanie Keener, 459 Chicago Avenue, directly across the street from
Keener?
the school, Kuehner.
Thank you, Jen.
My first question is for the planner. You just made an opinion that there is not a substantial negative impact. What negative impacts do you consider or will exist as a result of this change when you're determining whether they're substantial or not?
I consider the impacts, I don't wanna say that they're negative, the impacts that happen from this use include, 18 to 21-year-olds living there overnight. It includes the amount of staff that are coming. It includes, the year-round use of the facility and the deliveries, but outside of that, I don't have any other impacts that are associated, like that, when we use the facility, those are the things that will be noticed by the community that are comparable to other uses or less than other uses in the area.
And do you know how many students attended the school regularly in the years that the school is operating as St. Nicholas?
I don't have their enrollment.
And that this will also be year-round, as you indicated,
This.
other than the breaks?
Other than the breaks, there will be some summer activity, but as I understand, the summer school would be less, students, not necessarily all the students, was what the rabbi testified to.
My next question is for the rabbi. Are they allowed to have guests, or is there a limit to the number of guests or timing that guests may come to the premises?
You know, they usually don't allow guests coming to the property because it's a tense use, they don't have people coming there.
Is there a rule that says they can't have people there except on certain occasions?
It's a yeshiva, so you can't come, it's like a school, you can't have, like, look at a high school, you can't have guests coming to high school.
But this is after high school, like high school ends at 3 o'clock, so.
Exactly, but we treat it like high school, that's what I was trying to explain. These are a group of kids that took upon themselves, they want to continue high school, it's not like homeless kids that we house, it's the other way around. These people have homes, loving homes, they're here because they want to, be part of an intense program. So no guests usually would come, you're talking about a parent, something, dropping off something, for his kid, but they don't recommend it, the rabbi doesn't recommend it. We want them out, away from home.
And are they allowed to leave the campus?
With permission, they have to notify staff that they're leaving.
And under what circumstances would they be permitted to leave the campus?
They have a doctor's appointment, usually they recommend that the 6 weeks break, that they go home for Shabbos. Especially most of the doctors or the other things would be out of town. So you're talking about,
How about for
or
social activities?
they would go, if one of their friends got married, they would get permission to leave campus.
And,
Emergencies.
but as a regular matter, they're not coming and going
They're not
from the
coming and
campus? And they also wouldn't be leaving between Friday to Sunday regularly?
Friday, when sundown kicks in, and then you're talking about Saturday night, no movement at all, dead in the water.
And the project you mentioned in Hamilton, have you had any issues or concerns with the students that are there leaving or having, interacting socially in the community or violating any of the rules that you've set forth for this
Absolutely not.
school?
We never had a problem. Never had any issues.
That's all I have for now, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Farrell.
Mr. Farrell, just state your name and address, not to swear you in, okay?
Mike Farrell, 458 Chicago Avenue.
Mr. Farrell, do you swear affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
I'm curious about the impact on the water and sewer system of Egg Harbor City with 90 students. And I'm just wondering, as far as the washing of their clothes and they're taking showers and so forth, how is that? I haven't heard any comments on that, but with 90 students, I would assume there would be a certain amount of additional consumption of water and the sewer system, the washing of clothes, washing machines, so on and so forth. So I would just be curious with regard to that.
May I, Mr. Chairman? Traditionally, that's not a zoning consideration, but I'm happy to answer it. We will abide by, we will work with Mr. McGowan to determine who handles water and sewer flows in your community. We will look at it's one of the things our contractor will look at, the laterals, the lines, to make sure they're appropriately sized to handle the loads that are appropriate. And we will review it. You have a collection system and treatment is by
Treatment's by the
ACUA. So we will review with Mr. McGowan your local collection system for sanitary sewer. The Atlantic County Utilities Authority has ample excess capacity to handle any loads. Mr. McGowan is obviously acknowledging that. We all know there's vast amounts of unused capacity there. We'll review all of that with Mr. McGowan, and he will review that. To make we want to make sure that that's correct as well, that there are absolutely no problems in our facility internally as well. So water and sewer, we will review, our contractor will review it with Mr. McGowan as your engineer. And that would be with you, right?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to it as a city engineer. When upgrades are required to the system, they're typically required to be handled by the operator. So if the sanitary sewer line downstream of them is not adequate, they have to, pay to upgrade it. The number of students, all the flows are all projected, all of that's controlled by DEP. So they'll provide a calculation and the facilities will either be adequate or not, and they will have to upgrade them at their expense if that's what's required. So, hopefully that answers your question.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Farrell?
Yeah, I assume they'll just be doing they don't come and go, so they'll be doing their laundry and taking showers and everything right there in the facility. I was just curious as far as, is that being addressed or whatever?
It will be addressed.
Obviously.
That doesn't fall under the jurisdiction of the board. They're here to seeking a variance to be able to operate the seminary with a dormitory. Any of the interior of the building or the utilities that service it, that all goes to the building code official, and there's rules and regulations that the board has no knowledge of. But I asked the same question, and it's my understanding from the testimony given that they're willing to improve at great cost anything that needs to be done to rehabilitate the building, which they understand is substantial, but that doesn't fall under our land use board.
We'll not only upgrade the building, Mr. Chairman, but the adjacent infrastructure. So if the sewer lateral needs to be resized, I don't know whether it's ductile iron, I don't know what it is, but whatever Ryan tells us it needs to be, that's what we're gonna replace it.
Probably clay.
Probably clay,
All get low 20s.
Wow, and so you think it's the original line?
It's probably.
We'll have to replace it.
Yeah, like I said, we'll end up doing the calculation and see what's there, and it kind of is what it is.
We'll replace it in accordance with the reasonable requirements of your engineer, and there are standard engineering specifications for all of them.
And I will note the city is under contract through the WIPA process to transfer the water and sewer assets to New Jersey American Water.
Oh, that's right.
If that would close prior to this, then we would continue that operation with New Jersey American Water.
Yep, and we've done that many times. What Mr. McGowan indicated, I don't know if anybody heard that, the city is, I don't know where it stands, but they're in negotiation with New Jersey American Water to sell their water supply system to New Jersey American Water. If that happens before we start our process, we'll deal with either the city or New Jersey American Water as appropriate. I've had many projects with New Jersey American Water, as has the rabbi as well, and we know we can work. We will work.
Anyone else from the public?
Come up if you don't mind, so we can pick you up. And,
It's good over here.
Mr. Adams?
Yes.
Just state your name and address for the record.
Keith Adams, 520 Boston Avenue.
Mr. Adams, do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
I do.
I'm sorry, was there a first name I missed?
Keith. Keith?
Keith, thank you,
Yes,
Keith.
no problem. So I'm here tonight, I am a resident of the town, but I'm here tonight because was in conversation with some of the members of the land use board, also with Ryan. So many times, things that come through this land use board ends up in the 11th hour, and the applicant, both the land use board and also the town, are in some sort of mystery of what's actually going on. So in essence, to come here and kind of curb some of that tonight, I have been in talks with members of the diocese who have reached out to us, but for the land use board's information, also for the applicants, the parsonage and the church, okay, water supply feeds through the building that you're interested in buying. So there is no direct water. A sewer lateral, I believe, is tied separate, but water is fed through the building, underneath the alley, and tied to the parsonage and the church. So they have been kind of questioning how they're gonna do it. We have not given them any offer because there is no main for them to tie in. So that would be an extension of the main down Ninth Terrace there, the 500 block to tie in those two properties. There's no water on St. Louis Avenue for them. There's no water on Ninth Terrace. So I just wanted to bring it to the board's attention because many times the board makes a decision on something, the applicant doesn't know, it's an expense that you would have. And then also, going forward, that would have to be separated. You would have to cut ties with those buildings. Obviously, you would want to for your own building.
Right.
The following thing is, again, I make, same with the board, we don't govern or police anything inside the building, but we have been at that property this previous winter for leaks inside the building.
I'm sorry, Mr. Adams, who is we?
So I am the superintendent of public works for
Oh,
Edward
okay,
City.
thank you, I didn't know.
So we have been there and visited the property for leaks inside the building. I know that they have repaired some leaks inside the building, but I can tell you for your information only, that property, I would assume, would have to get some sort of sprinkler system upgrade to that to occupy it. So there will have to be an additional tap with a dedicated fire line to the building because your municipal service would not be big enough, so.
We're aware of that, thank you.
Okay, no problem. Again, just wanted to kind of bring it to the board's attention.
No, we
about the-
appreciate you telling us.
Appreciate it.
Yep, so,
We want to go in with open
I
eyes,
wanna
so we
just-
appreciate
I
it.
want to just, first of all, thank you for letting us know.
not a
But
problem.
more importantly, I just built this school on Massachusetts Avenue in Lakewood,
Okay.
bordering Tom's River. And it didn't have water at all, and we built a well, and even it supplied, it was like 60,000 square foot, brand new building. And we supplied it with a tank that had enough water to service the sprinkler system and the water, independent water. So worst case scenario, I know I can do that as well. But
Well, once you get inside that code book, you lose me, so that would obviously be on the other side of the fence for you. But again, it was just more informational, my statement for both the land use.
We
board.
appreciate it very much.
right,
Thank
thank
you
you.
for the disclosure.
No problem.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public?
Yes.
Mr. Ross, just your name and address, please.
My name's Robert Ross. I live at 601 St. Louis Avenue.
Mr. Ross, do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
I do. I just want to bring up that I feel that this deviates from my understanding of what a school is. A school is daytime hours. It can be year-round, you know, with summer schools and stuff, but it's not a living facility. It's a school is a place of learning, not living. Colleges have dorms, but they're usually separated. They're on big campuses. This is in the middle of a neighborhood. I think we're deviating from what we understand and all my neighbors understand of what a school is in a neighborhood. So I don't think it meets the significant inherent beneficial code. So there would have to be, because it is deviating from what we understand as a school. So if you're going to approve this, I really think that you're going to have to change ordinance says about that building. And if you do that, you know, I've been living here for a long time, and we've been down roads that just turn into a nightmare.
I'm sorry, what was that testimony?
It's just my opinion. So
I didn't hear the testimony.
I said, I've been here a long time, and things that we've approved in the past have turned into a nightmare.
I resent that remark, Mr. Chairman.
I-
The implication is that if you approve this school, it will turn into a nightmare. I resent that remark and ask that it be stricken from the record.
All right, I take that back.
The house of worship by seminarians is going to turn into a nightmare, please.
The only reason I even say things like that is,
Mr. Deman, excuse me, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but addressing the board, we didn't make a statement, sir.
I understand that, and I object to it, and I have the right to proffer objections, and the chair has the right to rule on those objections under the law, as Mr. Manos well knows, and the implication of the statement, I think, is totally, totally unfounded.
has nothing to do with what we're anticipating putting in there. It has to do with what we're left with if something like that disappears. And that's the reason I said, we're stuck with a living facility, multi-unit living facility in the middle of the neighborhood. I did have some concerns about yeshivas and what their impact on other neighborhoods were in and around the Northeast. And to tell you what I got offline with different communities was not something I felt comfortable with. I suggest that before you guys make any decisions, reach out to other communities about what's been going on with some yeshivas in their neighborhood. I don't know if they're related at all, it doesn't matter. I'm just saying, I looked up in general to see what I found online, and it was not impressive. But I get back to, I had no problem with the school being in there, a school itself, but not a living facility. I think it deviates from what we understand as a school. We're gonna have people living there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, year round. When they say they leave, there's nothing that says they're out at a certain time and back at it's like, some may stay, some may not. They could, that sounds like it's pretty up in the air. So I'm guessing it's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, that somebody could be in that school, living in that facility. And it's not a house, it's not a dorm, it's a school. And that was all I wanted to say.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Anyone else in public?
Name and address, please.
Yes, my name is Albert Jimpetti. I live at 903 Claudia Street, across from the school. Bob,
Jim Petty,
yes, I do.
swear affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth.
Yes, I do.
Can you just state your address again so she gets it?
Yes, 903 Claudia Street.
Thank you.
Bob mentioned a few minutes ago that when he did some perusals on the internet, that he found some negative articles and references to yeshivas in other parts of New Jersey and New York, and references to mostly not abiding by codes, not obtaining certificates certificates to get into the facility and abiding by all those codes. If you would like, I would like to share those articles.
Mr. Chairman, I vigorously object. The law is abundantly clear. The board is obligated to make its decision based upon the testimony that's produced before you in this hearing,
I understand
not
that.
based upon hearsay determinations. The internet hearsay is rank hearsay. I have no idea what yeshivas are being talked about or where. I cannot cross-examine that individual. I cannot speak to that individual. That's like saying, indicting all schools because some schools are bad schools. This is not admissible evidence. I strenuously resist its introduction in evidence or any references to internet searches about yeshivas generally, just as I would about schools generally if we sought to put a school here. There are good school operators, there are bad school operators. We believe this is a good yeshiva operator. and the proof is in the pudding, what they've done elsewhere. But to introduce rank hearsay is, it's terribly, terribly prejudicial, and it denies us of our rights to cross-examine. Because in a hearing like this, I have the right, as Mr. Manos well knows under the land use law, to cross-examine a witness. I can't cross-examine the internet and all these various sources that Mr. Giampetti seeks to introduce. It is not admissible, vigorously object to it.
So, Mr. Nemat, then, would you like to ask Mr. Giampetti any questions about his?
Well, no, I'd like him to finish his testimony, then I'll determine whether I'd like to ask him any questions. Okay.
I'm finished with my testimony. If they don't want to see the articles, then that's the end of the story.
No, no,
It
Mr.
would be
Giampetti,
appropriate.
if I may.
I understand.
You live, Mr. Giampetti, how are you? Real quick, you live across the street, sir?
Yes, I do.
And you heard the rabbi's testimony?
Yes, I do.
Where, based on the rabbi's testimony, you think they're gonna be a bad operation?
According to his testimony, I think it would probably be a decent operation, but I have my concerns actually because there's a ton of articles that are written on the internet that oppose what he says.
I understand, but this is a specific school that wants to come and establish itself here. And you've heard the rabbi's testimony. Do you speak, do you think his testimony in any way was not accurate or was
No.
untruthful in any way?
No, I do not.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Giampetti, I appreciate it.
Anyone else from the public? Yes, sir.
Your name and address, please. and I'll
My
get
name is James Farber, F-A-R-B-E-R. I live on 521 Chicago Avenue.
Mr. Farber,
Yeah.
please raise your right hand. Do you swear affirm the testimony you're about to give us the truth?
Yes.
Thank you.
I just have a statement. I wrote a letter because I was concerned about the situation here.
I'm sorry, where does the witness live? I didn't hear.
I live on 521 Chicago Avenue.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. I wrote a letter originally, and but it wasn't admissible. So I just want to make a statement about what that letter said. I took off from work so I could be here because I'm just, I live close by, so it's a concern for me. I'm a homeowner and taxpayer in Egg Harbor City, and I'm here to voice my concern about the proposed changes to St. Nicholas's and that I received notice about. For years, this was an elementary school for children. Now it's described as its proposed use as a dormitory for housing adults to study. The concern is that the impact that proposal will have on my neighborhood and community. Any renovation to this old building will be costly and extensive. How will the neighborhood be protected when this happens? The building is full of asbestos, there is no elevators, central air conditioning, nor is it handicapped accessible. What would become of the building if it's sold once again? Apartments? Who knows? As a taxpayer, it's my hope that this board will observe and take into consideration the concerns of having a dormitory and or apartments at that school and the impact it will have on the neighborhood, community, property values, and taxes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. You're welcome.
Anyone else?
I just have one final comment. Go ahead. Oh, I thought someone else did. I do want to ask one question.
Come on up. We have to get your name and get you sworn in. And your address, please.
My name's Kim Hesse, it's 236 New Orleans Avenue.
I'm sorry, could you repeat your name? I didn't hear it.
Kim Hesse, Hesse.
Thank you.
Sure,
And Ms. Hesse, do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
yes.
Thank you.
I just have a question for the rabbi. What I wanted to know is, I know we said this is a school, and all of our schools here in Egg Harbor City do community service. Will they do some sort of community service?
In the past, we had such requests, and they definitely are open to that, 100%.
What kind of service have they done, if you don't mind me
In
asking?
the past, they did a program, I know in different facilities, they gave out, once a year they gave out like free food. I know we had such a program once. But again, we're working with the local community. They wouldn't just do it. This would be a working effort with the local communities to see what's needed sometimes.
They would work hand in hand with the community.
We definitely work hand in hand with the communities. I do wanna address, I might wanna address something against my attorney's advice. I do wanna address to all the public that's spoken, and if it's okay.
Sure, please.
A lot of the concerns that they're bringing up, I'm gonna go to the charter school industry. I'm a landlord as well, don't operate them, of charter schools throughout the state of New Jersey. Anybody would go on my website, check it on my website, my business website. I built many charter schools in the state of New Jersey. We go online, we put in the word charter school, I will tell you stories about in Newark in different states, in different cities, horrific stories. The charter schools that we operate are blue ribbon charter schools, the best of the best. What I'm trying to say is, any school operator, I think my attorney addressed this, any school is part of the building and is the operating of the school. It's all about reputation. It's all about how you operate and what you operate. In this case, especially with putting in so many millions of dollars, your point of not having certificate of occupancy, this wouldn't happen because you're talking about investors that are putting a lot of money and want the school to thrive. Legally, if you don't have certificate of occupancy, the city of Egg Harbor City, not this board, but the building department will shut you down. A lot of the news, I don't know what, maybe it's in New York, they get away with it. Today in the state of New Jersey, if you have and you don't comply with the state of New Jersey, they shut you down overnight.
These were examples of places in New Jersey.
We don't know what the stories are, like I said, I can't cross-examine.
Yeah, I understand.
I can only talk about the school that we operate. You're talking about great fines, you're talking about, we always realize today's day and age, maybe in the 80s they used to operate like that. Today's day and age, you can't survive, especially with the department, the DOH, Department of Health, and you talk the Department of Education. You get one little fine and the school goes away. They just shut you down. So I don't know, it could be some neighbor, angry neighbor writing. It could be you're talking about younger kids of the 14 to 18, which sometimes, 14 to 16 or 17, but sometimes you can't discipline them. Sometimes you're talking about a neighborhood kid that you keep on telling the neighbors, hey, they're gonna behave, but they're 14 years old, what are you gonna do? And like we said, everybody's accepted because they need a school. You're talking about a very specific group that they're coming voluntarily to be on an intense program. They're not neighborhood kids that don't have the children, the parents drop them off and say, hey honey, you gotta go to school. It's not that type of thing. The school doesn't tolerate it because they wanna keep their reputation. It's a very, I don't wanna say it's expensive because it's not a lot of money, but they wanna keep their reputation. A student, they see a little bit hanky-panky business, they get rid of that student before you know it. Not because of the neighbors, because they want school, they wanna keep the school reputation. And you can check that with Hamilton. You have a very high-end school reputation. If the second our reputation drops, nobody wants to get to that school.
Rabbi, if I may,
It's something.
may I, Mr. Chairman?
I don't mind the question, I think,
Rabbi,
Steve,
I'm sorry, no, I just wanna
I
ask-
think my attorney's overreacting because he's coming from a legal perspective. I understand what you guys do, that's what I do all day long. I mend fences, I deal with neighbors. I also operate, I have a synagogue, my own synagogue, and we have, the neighbors are like, are probably my biggest supporters. And when I did the application, they were like, oh, it's neighbor to synagogue, we're gonna have parking issues. For synagogue, we have 50 members. And I would say my biggest supporters are my neighbors. So it's about, you have to go off judgment of character, who's operating it, what we're doing. And we will always be open to listening to what neighbors have to say, because we wanna have good neighbors.
Good, because I live right across the street from you.
Excuse me, Rabbi.
You'll be, hopefully one day you'll be laughing from this conversation, because
I hope so.
the second I get a phone call, there's somebody probably address it immediately, because we wanna show our students, this is how we treat neighbors. And because, remember, they're becoming rabbis, we wanna have our prestige, and this is not some school that will bring some adolescent kids that are having trouble, or drug abuse kids, that's not what we're doing. We're bringing kids, it's a elite program. And what many people brought up here, I don't know if my attorney should really address it, but I'll address it. My attorney addressed that we're gonna be left with a big building if we sell it or we move out of
I'll address it.
residential.
Let me deal with that, Rabbi. It's a legal issue.
It's a legal issue that we had this in the past. We have to come back. They can't just bring in whatever you want. It comes back to this board. This gets kicked back to the board and they have to come with a new use variant at the board. That's the reason why we're here tonight, because we're gonna have clear resolution. I think you should explain to the public what a resolution is.
I'll address my comments to the board, Rabbi.
Excuse me,
I
Rabbi.
will, I'm obligated, Rabbi,
she's
In
got a question.
respect, I must address my comments in the board in deference to the board. Rabbi,
Everything's
I'm not
moving.
one last
I'm
thing.
not
Can
finished.
can we let Ms.
I'm
Smith
sorry,
finish,
I'm
please?
sorry. I thought you were finished. I apologize.
Rabbit, will you be teaching at the school? At the school in Egg Harbor City?
Personally,
Yes.
I probably won't be teaching in the school.
And will we be able to have a direct line to you if there
Yes.
are any problems?
Yes, because me, I will be operating as the landlord. So you have to look at this, there's two parts of the school here. We're owning this school and then it's operating the school. Since I'll be the owner of the school, we will have direct, and that's why I give you, it's funny you mentioned that. That's something I give usually to everybody and say, this is my number, if there's the slightest problem, I want to hear about it first.
That would be
I'll
wonderful.
definitely do that.
Thank you.
And Rabbi, you have the adequate capitalization to carry into effect this program?
Yes.
That's the key. I mean, it's not a zoning board issue, but the key is it capitalized sufficiently to carry out the effort in this school?
And more so, because we're dealing with large investors and people that are putting in a lot of capital, they want to be up and up because they can't afford to lose their name. The bank, we have a bank loan, it's gonna get involved. Second, you have violations. How does it look to the bank? The bank says, wait a second, I'm giving you a loan, you don't have a certificate of occupancy. The banks, I'm just trying to explain, I understand a lot of people don't do real estate every day here. That's, I'm trying to give them a little bit of education, how it works. Is it appraisal? I wanna get a financing, the appraisal comes down. Where's, the first question, where's the certificate of occupancy? Oh, we don't have one, so why are we financing the building? So it doesn't really work that way, everybody can do whatever they want. There's a very clear path. Investors are happy, we wanna hear the first question, are the neighbors happy? Yes, they're happy. And it goes all together. No child or no student would want to upset a neighbor because right away, I get a phone call. What do you think happens if I get that phone call? The operator of the school knows that this can't work. Because we wanna have good neighbors and we wanna make sure everybody's happy and we wanna be part of the community. We're coming to Egg Harbor City, there is opportunity, but we checked out, we do feel that it's a very quiet, genuine area that the students will be able to be part of it and do their studies in quiet and peace with no hustle. They want it out from the city, they want away, and they're quiet, quiet peace.
Thank you.
Yes.
I have a question.
Sure. Just come up, give us your name and address, I'll get you sworn in.
George Frick at 200 New Orleans Avenue.
Frick?
Yes.
Mr. Frick, do you swear affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
I had a question. Being that it's a religious school, will they have to pay taxes?
It's going to, it's really not, the law is very clear, it's of no moment in a use variance application, none. But I'll answer the question anyway. The existing school doesn't pay taxes, and this school will enjoy the same status.
I guess my question is, it's an R9 zone, which is residential, 9,000 square feet. So you probably could build 10 60-foot homes over there, 60-foot lots. I'm just looking at the assessment, and I just pulled it up just for the school on a 400-foot lot. And the assessment is $3,073,000. So I just multiplied that. That comes over to $162,000 in taxes. It could be lost.
No, the municipality hasn't realized any taxes from this property in 100 years.
No, I
Again,
understand.
The only reason why there's a value put on the ground is for county equalization tax purposes. That's the only reason why, and it has no relevance in land use hearings. The law is very, very clear.
Okay, I was just making a comment that you could get, 10 lots over there residential. And like I said, this assessment just based on 400 by 150. There's another 200-foot, lot that I didn't figure in here. I'm just making a comment. It's $162,000 of lost taxes for the city.
Well, it's really
If this
not.
was permitted.
Respectfully, Mr. Chairman, it's really not, because the first thing that would have to happen is somebody would have to tear down the building. The building is full of asbestos. That cost is very significant. That has to get added to the purchase price of the property. And then the developer, I represent developers all the time, developer has to, Mr. McGowan knows this well, the developer would have to then factor in the demolition costs and look at the cost on a per lot basis and say, can I obtain a yield to get 10 lots out of that at fair market value on a building lot in this community? Well, I submit that the fact that the property has been for sale for such a long period of time establishes beyond conjecture that it's not saleable for that reason, because the demolition costs are so significant.
George, unfortunately, the status of whether they pay taxes or not isn't anything that we can focus on it as a land use board. They're here for variance, and obviously the city doesn't own or control the property. It's owned by the diocese, so, but just as an aside, there had been, over the years, several developers came in, some with the idea of rehabilitating the building, and some with the idea of tearing it down and putting up residential, and when they put the numbers together, it didn't work. To put in single-family homes, which is what we would like to see, they wanted a mix of multifamily and single-family homes, but they still couldn't make it work because of the expense for the demo or the thing there. So that has been something that happened in the past, but it never came before the board. They questioned informally before they filed applications and everything, obviously because it would cost money, and when they did their calculations, it didn't work, so.
Unfortunately, the real estate market wasn't as good as it is now. But I just was making a comment, so that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Thank someone else? Keith?
Yes.
So,
Still under oath.
yes, thank you. So just to go back to touch on, and this is a question for myself now, just listening to the comments, Mr. Ross and Mr. Farber had stated, if we're transitioning from a school, right, into kind of like a hybrid school/boarding facility, if the rabbi's program, or the applicant's program was not to work out, or 3 years down the road he chose to expand somewhere else and sell the property, and an applicant comes in front of the land use board, is it now an acceptable application because has been used as boarding? So where now Mr. Farber or Mr. Ross could live next to a apartment complex?
Mr. Lee, that's what he
May I answer
introduced.
that,
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman? Thank you very much. First of all, we're not transitioning to any kind of mixed use. It's one use. It's a school, nothing more. The only reason the students are living there is so that they can gain a religious education. So it's one land use. If the board acts to grant a use variance, again, as your consultants, Mr. Manos, Mr. McGowan, can well attest, the only use that would be offered, and I asked the rabbi this question very pointedly, would be the use the rabbi and his organization intend to make of the school. That is to say, as a religious school, a yeshiva, a seminary for the education of those wishing to join the rabbi. That's the only use that could be made of that property. If somebody seeks to come in and the rabbi believes that their use will be hopefully perpetual, they have a very growing community, we know it's a very big and expanding community, and they're seeking locations throughout the country in quiet communities, such as yours, where they can send the students to be educated. Correct me if I'm wrong, Rabbi. In a quiet environment where learning is the paramount endeavor, where there's no distractions, where there's not anything that can distract them. So we think it will be for as long as we can possibly imagine. Their families are big, their communities are big, and we believe it is a growing demand for rabbinical students and will be ever growing. However, if it should ever cease, and that's the question that was raised by another comment as well, any alternate use of this facility would have to be the subject, and I can't stress this more, would have to be the subject of a separate application that would have to come back before this board on notice to all property owners and the subject of a new application for a variance relief. It would be a totally new application, and everything would be determined anew. So the only use that would be authorized is the use we are here proposing if the board elects to consider this by way of use variance. Am I correct, Mr. Manos?
That's correct. Or a compliant use, obviously, that one that meets our ordinance standards as a PSC.
Well, yeah, but if a compliant use came in and we were to somehow 20, 30 years hence no longer operate this and a compliant use wanted to come in, they would have to come in certainly for site plan because obviously, and probably need some variance relief of some kind. So it would be the subject of an application for development before this board.
If the board were to grant a use variance, pursuant to that use variance approval, it would be limited to what they're proposing here. So anything different, they'd have to come back to the board to the extent they try to use the prior approval.
Keith, did he answer your question? Do you have anything else?
He did answer, but again, and just for clarification, we're here tonight for a change in use variance because it is not gonna be just a school, it's gonna be a boarding facility as well.
It's for a use variance because what they're proposing is not permitted in the zone.
Correct.
So it's just for that singular use. That's
So-
not permitted here, so they're seeking a use variance that would permit that use in this zone.
Right, so we can agree that it's not exactly what the building was used for previously.
Well, it's not only not what it was used for, it's also not a complying use in the current zoning ordinance.
Correct.
If it was, they wouldn't have to be here at all.
So it,
That was the last one.
We think it is, that's why we applied for the interpretation, but we've applied in the alternative for the use variance.
so in the future, if the applicant decided it was his best interest to sell the property, does it make it easier for someone to transition through land use board as in a multi-living facility?
Just only if they were to open up a rabbinical seminary.
Yeah, it's specific just to
But,
this
but the,
use.
but the building would have been upgraded to the point where it can house 90 people now. And that's my question, and all kidding aside, that's my question, because at that point now, the next attorney that comes in front of the board has a leg to stand on for it being a multi-living
If
facility.
I may, Mr. Chairman, that's totally untrue, respectfully.
And it may be untrue, that's why I'm
If I may, I
asking
didn't
the
interrupt
question.
you, if you wouldn't interrupt me, I'd appreciate it, okay? It's just, the residential, the dormitory uses are accessory to the yeshiva, okay? The only way nobody could come in and say, I wanna operate a dormitory alone without a religious educational facility. The dormitories are accessory, they're ancillary to the yeshiva, the educational facility. So nobody could come in and say, oh, the yeshiva's no longer there, I just wanna use the dormitory as a dormitory.
I think Mr. Adams is just answering the question, and we understand that your in-depth knowledge of the law is very vast, and we can't possibly know everything you have.
Well, no, I'm
So
not.
he was just asking a question, I believe.
I understand, and I'm not trying to attack him personally for asking a question, I understand the question, I'm just trying to answer the question.
But so, and the reason I'm asking the question, just for clarification, I haven't, it's not my right to see plans ahead of time, but I don't know if the building, each room has bathrooms, so you don't know what it could transition to. So if you're saying it's a dormitory, there's common bathrooms, common kitchen, then obviously it would be a lot harder for that to happen. But as the public here, we don't know what the architect designed and what it was actually including. So that's why I asked the question.
I understand, but
So
those
it wasn't
determinations.
out of ignorance, it was out of
Well,
curiosity.
I understand, sir, but it's a legal question you've asked, and I've tried to answer it based upon land use law, okay? The plans will be made public, they will be in the office of the construction official if we are favorably considered, and they will be available for review by anybody who wants to see them, yourself included. And you can look at the plans and see all the fixtures and that we propose, and the rooms, the room partitions, the light fixtures, everything, the mechanical system, heating, ventilating, air conditioning, all that will be made very public. I don't mean in a hearing, because
Sure,
by
it
law,
would be
that's not
like-
subject to a hearing, but on file in the office of the construction official.
But
I'm
Go
gonna try
ahead.
to answer Keith's question in a different way. The interior features of the building that would be made after this use is granted would have no bearing on a future use application for this site. Each use variance application has to stand on its own, and whatever's inside, that was appropriate for the prior use, and we determined that use was appropriate here. But any use that would come forward, we're evaluating that use on its merits, completely independent from this, and independent of whatever the interior features of the building. Just because it's easier to transition something to the building there doesn't mean it's more palatable or more appropriate for the zone. They could gut the whole thing and turn it into a gymnasium. We're not gonna let a professional sports team move in and establish a stadium. It's not. The next application has no bearing on what this is, and interior features have no bearing on what the board would consider.
Right, so, but if it is if they're successful, right, and it becomes what it is, what then would a school of some sort, non-religious, religious, be able to move back into that building with dormitories allowed? Because it technically would not be a change of use, so let's just say that it is on, and I hope it's successful, if they are successful, I wish nothing but the best, but if it is not, and he decides to sell the property, or the business decides to sell the property, is this something that can continue on down the road without an actual change of use decision by the board?
Only if the next use would follow all of the conditions that were presented in all of the testimony that was presented by this applicant. So if this use failed and another religion wanted to establish a seminary that met identical criteria, the use would carry with the property. And that could reoccupy the building under, substantially similar circumstances without coming back to the board. But they would have to meet essentially everything that's been discussed here. All of the testimony, everything, how they had discussed they would operate it, 6 people, 10 to 12 parking spaces.
No cars for students.
Right, no driving, so all of that same criteria would need to be met. If any other use wanted to resume, had this use vacated the property and another use wanted to come in, if they deviate from any of the testimony of this evening, they would have to come back for their own use variance.
Understood. Thank you.
Keith, if I may say something.
I have a question. Keith, that's a great question, and I want to present it to my professionals with an example. 5 years from now, Rabbi decides to sell the building. Stockton decides to buy the building. Does Stockton have to come back here?
Under what Ryan answered, yeah, because there will be parking changes,
Yeah.
there will be driving.
Their operation would be
yeah.
substantially
It has to
dissimilar
come
from
back.
this.
Yeah.
I mean,
And it's not religious, there's no religious.
Not
Well,
religious, say they wanna have 2 classes over there and they wanna
Yeah,
house
it would-
50 people.
It would bring us back to the definition of school and whether we interpreted the university operation to be the definition of a school. If we did not, then they would require use variance.
But so to go and to touch on what Todd's saying, I think Todd's on the same bus as me, and one of us is driving here, but the answer being is, could we get stuck with a Stockton that has 50 cars there and has kids that are now not following the strict religious program and on Saturdays partying, Sundays showing up at 2 in the morning slamming car doors? That's what I'm saying, down the road, is that something we could get
Under
involved?
this application, absolutely.
Thank
If
you.
I may say something, Keith?
Sure.
Just because you brought up and I do want the public should know. Basically, the first floor is just one big area, study area, and the top floor is basically a few rooms and some gang bathrooms, some gang showers. It's not a cluster, it's not a hotel, everybody has their own. That would cost way too much money and it's not enough room. Just because of the curiosity part, I want to share with you.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
It's
And
very-
again, it was just because I'm sure
Very
there's a
much-
lot of that
very much
curiosity in the
made-
crowd
It's not
tonight.
made for comfortable, it's not an hotel. It's made because they're not gonna drive home, they live usually between an hour and 2 hours away, so they gave them something to live off. And it's not that type of school. People wanna go to fancy school, they're not gonna come to this school.
Got it, thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
I guess this is for our professionals, and if we grant something, could it be just for this application only? It goes forever?
I think, if I may say something, I think if, the fact that you put in no driving, that's a very harsh.
Well, I don't mean that, I meant,
Generally speaking.
I meant that if you decide to sell in 10 years, that no
Exactly.
matter what the
I don't think
outcome
I'll
is,
find
that they have to come back.
I don't think I'll find a buyer that's gonna be able to live up to the resolution.
I agree.
That says no cars.
Generally speaking, the law is that the use variance runs with the land.
Okay.
But going back to the rabbi's comments, Mr. Nemeth's comments, and Ryan's comments, they would have to come in and the no student parking thing right away might make that an unrealistic possibility that anyone would ever take over this use variance, plus the 10 to 12 spots for employees and, all the other conditions, the religious component, but technically speaking, no, it does not automatically end when they cease to operate.
Well, I know normally it doesn't, I didn't know if we could put a stipulation that it would. maybe I worded it wrong, it probably wouldn't be wrong. Okay.
Yeah, that's.
We might be able to put it in, but it's.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah,
Just
you-
asking.
Yeah, you can't limit it to the applicant.
If I may, I think the key respectfully is tailoring the resolution so that it's narrowly tailored to this use.
Exactly.
And that's the key.
Resolution is gonna be a very harsh one. I know when I wanna occupy a building, by the way, I gotta print out the resolution, I gotta read through. If it says no parking on it, I don't think I'll get too many buyers.
Anyone else from the public?
I think, I'll be honest, I think the concern is, as Mr. Ross tried to express, where he got chastised ignorantly, this board has approved things in the past, how many years, that once we open a door, when that person leaves, it's not the person who came in seeking to do things the right way. But after that person leaves, we then have an issue that we can't control. And it's happened many times. So this board has to be very careful, not predicting what's gonna happen today, but what's gonna happen 5 years, or 10 years, or 15 years from now at this facility. Mr. Peterson brought up that in the past, we had someone else who wanted to develop that piece. They wanted to put 26 homes on there to make their mathematics work. The board didn't see that as a good fit for the community. So I think we're all concerned about not what they want to do with the building. What can happen after that we are going to have to deal with? We can't limit it to a particular religion or any religion. Okay? So we can't discriminate because they don't have a religious background. So someone else can open it up as a technical school later on. Kids can come and go at night.
But not without coming back to the building.
Yeah, I think.
Part of the
Putting
proof
conditions
are-
on the.
Okay, but we heard from, we're gonna get another lawyer who's gonna give us case laws on 50 other things that's gonna argue the substantial versus non-substantial and positive and negative impacts. Again, I know they have to come in front of us. It's not a matter of whether or not they come in front of us. Does this board have any teeth in the future to stop things that isn't good for this community? I don't think so.
Absolutely. I think so, yeah.
Well, that's where we differ, and that's why there's
So,
7 of us up here.
So we're about to take a vote and do business here. So as I understand it, from the last meeting, when they asked for an interpretation of a school including dormitories, I don't think any of us here on the board thought that the definition of a school included dormitories, and I still believe that the definition of a school doesn't include dormitories in our limited community here. We don't have any experience with that. So we're gonna vote on, I believe we have to vote on the interpretation.
We're gonna do that first when we get there.
And then, because if we would deny the interpretation, then that moves it to them having to get a variance. And with that variance, there are conditions in the resolution that say just exactly what they said, that this is how we're gonna operate it. It's gonna be a religious teaching institution, and if it fails, it cannot be anything other than that unless somebody comes back to the board to do something else with the building. Do I understand that right, Leo?
Yes, you do.
I understand the process. I'm just not concerned about what the next process is going to be.
Well, I know, John, our fear, your and mine, and much of the public is that the town is inundated with rental properties. And our biggest fear is something like that out of our control turning into more rental properties. And I think that that's a concern for everybody. So, what can we do but put conditions on it that, you know, they're not to speak for the client, but they haven't disagreed with anything that we're asking them
I'm
to
not
do.
gonna, listen, what they're proposing, I think is a great program. I'm not opposed to that. I'm tasked personally as a member here to try to look out for the future.
Me too, John, but
And that's
I'm
where I
confident
have,
that we can.
I have concerns, because I've heard other people come up here and argue 15 things to Sunday, opposite, and we won't talk about all the other properties that we've had issues with. Okay, but we have properties that we can't get them to cut the grass. But we have, they clearly made concessions when they came to this board, how they were gonna function, how they're gonna work.
That's not the board's problem, that's a code enforcement problem.
You're right, but this board allows it to get to that point. So, again,
Mr. Farrell?
With regard to a Carver not having a school that contains dormitories,
I'm sorry, who's testifying?
Mr.
Farrell.
Mike Farrell. The comment just sort of caught me off guard. He said Carver doesn't have any schools that have dormitories. Okay, and then I just wondered, how would you consider, or what would you consider Harbor Fields?
It's not a school.
It's a reform school.
it's a state institution.
It's a nice word for it.
It contains dormitories.
Pre-existing.
Somebody else have?
I just wanted to, wrap up my thoughts on it. I do think that.
I'm sorry, is the public portion otherwise closed?
Anyone else from the public?
No, no,
Yeah,
you
no,
have a
you're gonna
chance
get
to
to speak, I just wanna make sure.
The other folk here,
Oh, I
the gentleman
didn't
here
see.
didn't speak.
Come on
yet.
up.
Jenna, I'm not trying to foreclose you, I just
I
wanted
knew
to
you
start.
wanted to hear
Maybe
what I had to say.
No, no.
Name and address, please.
Gary Gleisberg, 555 Chicago Avenue.
Mr. Gleisberg, do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Just wanted to come up as a citizen of Egg Harbor City and probably one of the newest homeowners in the area that we're talking about. And the reason that we bought the home that we did is because it's in a tranquil, quiet, very friendly neighborhood. And I'm not suggesting that we wouldn't have friendly neighbors. But my concern is that tranquility goes away, property values drop in the area. And if we grant a variance, or you grant a variance, I have nothing to do with it, does that cover the entire property? Because there's a lot of real estate there. And down on our end by Claudia's, with just the grass and the trees there, could it be expanded? What if they're very successful and they want to expand that? Does it just cover the variance? Does it just cover where the school building is, or just certain plots, or is it the entire block? That anything could be done for that, and then we have more buildings, and, and do they have to come back before a board? I'm not familiar with the process.
I think the attorneys can answer whether it covers the whole property, but any construction that would go on outside the footprint of the existing building would have to come before the board for a site plan.
Okay.
Yeah, to expand on that, not only are they limited that they couldn't expand the building, they can only have 90 students, they can only have 6 staff at a time, they can only have X number of parking spaces. Everything that's been discussed this evening would be limitations that we imposed on this use. And any expansion of that in any direction, whether it's construction or staff or students or whatever, any expansion against any of those conditions would require them to come back to this board.
And it's only limited to the space occupied by this building. We couldn't use the whole property.
Yeah, I mean, the use carries with the land, so I mean, technically it runs with the land, but as testimony is, they're only proposing to utilize the existing building.
But if we ever sought to expand it, we have to come in for what's called a D2 variance, would be expansion of an existing non-conforming use, which would be the subject of a separate application to be heard by, on notice to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have an additional thing just to add. Say they have it in, everything goes through and they're up and running.
Who polices this? Who polices the amount of staff that's there? Who polices the amount of students that are there? Who polices the amount of people parking in the parking lot? Who does that fall on? Code enforcement. Okay, so if code enforcement's gonna inspect that piece of property, is it monthly? Is it annually?
I mean, if you're gonna require code enforcement to inspect them monthly, you're gonna have to require them to go to Wawa monthly and say, okay, they're parking.
I'm just curious. Right now, I know code enforcement. I ran it for a while. It's shorthanded. It's really shorthanded in this town, as you can see what goes on around here. That's why I'm asking the question. So the grass is a moat. The outside starts looking a little shabby. It's up to us to monitor that piece of property, right? So who does the inside stuff? Who does the things like, how are you gonna know how many students are there? How are you gonna know?
I believe that.
So you're saying you're setting limitations, you're setting limitations, does the state come in and inspect this
Rabbi
thing?
can probably answer your
That's a very good question. And usually what happens is all over the state of New Jersey, because I have many properties, the neighbors are code enforcement, trust me.
No, I need to know who legally enforces what's going
What
on in
happens
that
is a
property.
neighbor picks up a phone, he calls code enforcement, because that's what happens in other, because I own a lot of properties. What happens is if I have a neighbor that doesn't mow the grass, usually a neighbor calls the code
I
enforcement.
can understand the outside stuff.
They report
That was
it
just
right away.
thrown on top.
Well,
What I'm
let me
concerned
address
about
it.
is the parking, we don't know whose cars come and go. How do we know? We don't know how many students are in that building. They can come and go. They could be up to 120 kids in there, and they might only stay for one semester, and then they're out, and then the next time they're.
If you don't mind, I'd like to answer this. First of all, we do have a state, we have a fire inspection, and because we're regulated by the state, usually they're very intense with that, they have twice-a-year inspections. Especially dormitory, which size people don't know this, but this goes also, Trent has to sign off on a dormitory. Let's assume we do get granted use variance, and the building code officials like it, the state is on top of it, because it's a school, so we have state on top of this. I wanted to answer the question to the other neighbor that just moved in. I'll answer the question together with you. I gave a lot of testimony, and I want to explain this. We spoke about expanding the school. This particular model, especially for small schools, not only because of the use variances, because the way this program works. These kids do want to be secluded in a small little contained area. So back to the other gentleman's questions as well, about growing. We're not growing it here. It's a certain program. It's designed 90 students. You're talking about 18 to 21. The reason we said that 3 years, so it's 30, 30, 30. That's why I said 90. Usually it's less, I'll be honest with you. In other schools we have 75, 80, but it goes up to 90, max 90. It's a certain, I would say, ingredient. That's what we want to do. And we're trying to make them rabbis and move them out. It's not a growing community in terms of a private school from the community that's growing. The second is more than 90, they don't accept more than 90 because the program doesn't work. Not only from a building perspective, also from the program perspective. They can't get the right attention. People are not traveling 2 hours to an overcrowded school because we have enough overcrowded schools in New York. We're not covering it. The reason is we're taking them out of the overcrowding and bringing them to that secluded area and give them the little quality of life of 3 years, no cell phones, no cars, just focus on what you're doing and then go to Israel. I'm just giving you.
You know what? I believe you because I didn't think a rabbi would ever lie to me.
You can check out Hamilton.
But the thing is, somebody's got to police it. And does that fall on the city? That fall on the state? And how do we know that it's being policed properly? That's all I was asking the question.
I'll ask Bob a question. Does the Department of Education inspect your facility?
Definitely.
You didn't include that answer. I thought that might be helpful to answer.
Well, the Department of Education is not going to be inspecting the living quarters.
Should they show them? Boarding school? Because,
I don't know.
because
That's a
Trenton-
different thing that, I was sat on the school board here for 15 years, and
No,
they,
I'm talking about
they,
the state.
the state
No, no.
investigates
The Department of
the
Education.
education.
Not the local board of education, but the state comes in because it's a dormitory, they have very strict rules, but the sprinklers and everything, they come, they do their very regular. We need a certificate from the state above the regular municipality.
And I understand. I'm just asking who polices that?
The state.
Well,
Okay.
that's what I'm saying. My understanding is for boarding schools, the Department of Education actually does inspection of living quarters and all that, just because they're boarding schools.
And they do it periodically.
Yeah, I'm not that familiar with it, but that's my understanding is that there is an inspection from the Department of Education.
Yeah, I don't know
on
if
the
it's
boarding
once,
schools.
if it's every year, or it's twice a
Yeah,
year.
It's,
Do they
I think it's
report their
twice a year.
findings back to the city?
It's twice a year, and you don't know when they're coming, so technically it's every day.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Anyone else? Okay.
I just wanted to, give a final comment. I grew up in this town also. My parents own a house right across the street from the school on the corner of Chicago and Camp. And I attended this school, St. Nick's, as a young child, and so did my siblings and my other family members. This change in use and the impact, I think, is substantial compared to what has typically been the use of this school. It was a school term. It had maybe 70 kids a year attending the school. They were off in the summer. School was done at 2:30. We did not have year-round use. There were no overnights. And the way and the manner in which the school was operated through my entire lifetime until it closed was what we would say would be a regular school. The school, like a middle school, a regular K through 8. It was not a school which had overnight housing for young men. And I think it is a substantial change. If you drive up and down Chicago and Chicago and St. Louis, from the White Horse Pike to get to the Crusaders Field, it's all single-family homes there. We have multi-family homes on Philadelphia Avenue and in other areas of this city. But this is an area where people have lived and their ancestors have lived and their family has lived for years and years and years and years and years. And the quality of that lifestyle here is that you live down the street where your uncle lived in a single family home, or you walk down the street and you saw the people that you knew. It's not where you come to a building that's housing 90 students that are living there overnight, showering and eating and congregating. And it's a complete, to me, and I'm not a planner, I'm just a lawyer, it is a substantial change to our community, or this community. It's much, much different than it ever was. And I don't think the board should overlook the change that's going to occur in this area of this town by the use of this building for housing overnight gentlemen, and whether it's men or women, it doesn't matter, but housing people 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year is way, way, way different than what this building ever was used for, and what anybody that ever lived on these streets or grew up in this town on these streets expected to be surrounded by.
Anyone else in the public?
St. Nick's Strong Bugle Corps. Hey, remember that?
If there's no other comments from the public, we'll close the public portion.
Mr. Chairman, may I have a 5-minute recess before I sum up?
Sure.
Thank you.
Folks will take 5 minutes if you want to stretch your legs.
Violation.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to continue the proceedings, please.
Are you ready to go?
Thank you, folks. Do either of our professionals have anything at this time? I'm sorry, sir, we closed the public portion, but did you want to say something?
I am an attorney. I represent the parish, Our Lady of Perpetual Help Parish. And I'd like to just add my 2 cents, but I'll let Mr. Mano.
Hold that, I mean, I think it's in everyone's interest to let everyone speak. So let's get your name, just for the record.
Sir.
And go ahead.
May I approach? My name is Francis J. Minari. I'm an attorney at law, the law firm of McKernan, and Godino.
And you're speaking as an attorney, obviously.
Speaking
right?
as an attorney, and my client is Our Lady of Perpetual Help, which is the current owner of the property.
Floor's yours.
If I may. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak. I don't have a lot to say. I can say that the parish is interested in moving the property and has tried on numerous occasions to find an adaptive reuse for the property. But I think the chairperson here has alluded to the fact that various other developers have come in and they've not been able to make it work for housing. We are in support of this application because we see it as something that can work in this location and they're willing to invest in it. We'd like the board to approve this. We don't have plans to reuse the building, and we'd like to see, we're thrilled to hear that they're going to be next door neighbors and that they're going to reuse the building as it is, even if they are going to take down the crosses. We understand that.
We'll be good neighbors.
No, we understand that, and we're looking forward to having you there. Thank you. But if you have any questions of me, since I am kind of the last moment and an oddball for the comment, if you have any questions, I'll answer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. I want to thank you all for having the patience of Job and hearing our application, no pun intended, given that that's an Old Testament reference. But, look, I don't want my remarks to be perceived as being critical of the people who spoke, because change is always of concern, and I understand that. But I think what's most important, as your attorney and engineer will instruct you, is that you're obligated to follow the law. And the law we submit is very clear. And the test is not, as Ms. Cook would urge you, that this is a substantial change. That's not the issue. The issue is we're here for the use variance. Is there a substantial negative impact? And the uncontroverted proofs we submit show that there is no substantial negative impact to the grant of this use variance. And the affirmative proofs are very clear. A school and a religious school are treated the same under the law. They're treated as inherently beneficial uses. That satisfies the affirmative criteria for the grant of the use variance. As to the negative criteria, the law is also very clear in this regard. Mr. Manis will instruct you. Mr. McGowan's familiar with it as well because it arises again and again before ladies' courts around the state. It's the SICA, the Supreme Court balancing test. You look at the factors and you say, what are the negative impacts and can they be dealt with by the imposition of conditions? And then you look at, on balance, is there any substantial negative impact when you look at the conditions that are being imposed in the use that we're proposing? We submit that the proofs here show that there's no negative impact. First of all, there's no proofs to show that the enrollment of the school is 75. It's a guess. There's no proofs at all in that regard. We don't know. But if you look at what we are proposing, it's being proposed as a school. And all of the testimony I've heard and all of the comments from your professionals have said the conditions that should be imposed are limit driving by students. The rabbi has candidly indicated he's agreeable to doing that. And what you have the ability to do, and Mr. Manis is a very experienced land use attorney, is to craft a narrow resolution which approves this use and only this use. And I think that's very, very important because the concerns I've heard voiced from you, Mr. Garth, and from the members of the public is what happens in the future. Well, we can't deal with the future. And the law is quite clear. You must judge the application based upon the proofs we present to you in this hearing room. The rabbi has told you what their plan is. They have a sustainable plan. It's been sustainable in other locales. It has proven itself to be non-invasive or non-deleterious or harmful to any of its neighbors. There are no complaints in any other communities. They're well capitalized. They're well funded. They have the ability to carry this program, this multi-million-dollar program likely into effect, to take a building which your master plan recognizes should be renovated and rehabilitated. And that's what we propose to do. The occupants here are seminarians. They're students, male students, that are studying for the clergy. I mean, I respectfully urge, what better people would you want in your community? I mean, what better example might there be than those wishing to study for the clergy and they don't, they're not problem people or students or children, and they pose their benefit to the community, not a negative to the community. It's been an enhancement to the community in the other locales in which they exist, in Hamilton, in Lakewood, in the other locales in which the rabbis mentioned. And the mere indictment of yeshivas is we don't know about yeshivas that may be, sure, there may be poorly operated yeshivas just like there may be poorly operated schools. There may be poorly operated convenience stores, but Wawa operates a good convenience store, and they're building one in your community, as you well know, and they're a good operator. But by the same token, we can look at bad convenience store operators as well. So I think it's respectfully unfair to say, look at some bad yeshivas and look at what's on the internet. The future, we can't foresee, and maybe there have been problems in the past, but this is a use which is, we believe, sustainable and sustainable for a significant period of time. And the law is very, very clear. You base the decision on the record and the proofs presented before you in this hearing room. And based on those proofs, we satisfied the affirmative criteria because we're a school, albeit a religious school. Religious schools are treated just like public schools. They minister to the spiritual needs of all of us. They provide good examples to our families and our children. We will not have any substantial negative impact simply because the students are staying over on the property. And I say that for very important reasons. I think you've heard from the rabbi, and I think you can discern from his testimony that we want to work with the community. We don't want to be at odds with the community. I mean, if we are able to gain a variance, we're able to work with the community, we're able to come forward, we're able to restore the building, work with your engineer, work with your building department. If we're denied, we don't have that chance, and the only election we have is to whether or not we want to be at odds with you, and that's not where we want to be, quite candidly. We want to be able to work with you, we want to be a good neighbor in our community. The rabbi and his yeshiva have been good neighbors in other communities in which they exist. And I dare say that Mr. Maneri's client, the parish, has done their due diligence before they looked at and authorized this application be filed. They know that this is a good applicant, that they have the capitalization, the funding, the sustainability to carry the plan into effect. And look, if we don't get it off the ground and we're approved, that's one thing. But if we get it off the ground and it's capitalized and funded, it will be an asset to the community, both in terms of its aesthetic appearance and in terms of its benefit to the morals. You know, we always talk about health, safety, welfare. One thing we always leave out is morals. And, you know, one of the things I think we can all agree maybe we're missing a little bit in life today is religion, you know, of all kinds. And that's what we're trying to minister to, is to train people to be spiritual leaders in their communities, and that's the type of school we seek to introduce here because it is a quiet location. We thank you again for your time and consideration. We need 5 affirmative votes for this to be carried into effect, and we hope we're able to work with you cooperatively and on a going forward basis to make you proud of having and hosting the Rabbi's Yeshiva in your community. Thank you all very much, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I'd just like to offer something as sort of a point of clarity. Something that's come up a lot, both in Mr. Nieman's testimony and the planners, is the CETA test and substantial negative impacts. I just wanted to clarify that the substantial negative, the test, you're looking at identifying any adverse consequences and considering conditions which might be imposed to mitigate adverse consequences. That test is not in a vacuum. You have to consider them against the permitted uses. You're not considering substantial negative impact versus the nothing that has been there for the last 14 years. You have to consider what uses are permitted at that site, what the level of intensity of those uses would be, and then compare this use to what would be allowed at the site, and consider if granting this use variance would present substantial negative impacts which would not be presented by permitted uses. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you.
That point.
That's correct.
Because for a site that's been vacant for so long, it's easy for people to assume, oh, we're going to have negative impact, there's going to be activity, there's going to be all of these things. We can't preserve nothing at that site in perpetuity. Things are allowed to happen there. They're outlined in your land use ordinance. So when you are considering whether substantial negative impact, it is against what is permitted. You know, if a permitted use came in, would this use present negative impacts which would be substantial in nature and different from what would any of the permitted uses? So again, I just wanted to have a point of clarity there.
Thank you.
one comment.
May the rabbi make a comment, Mr. Chairman?
One comment. Is, what's your name again?
Al.
Al? I spoke with Al. I want to point out one point because Al did point out to me, he had a very good question. I want to address it publicly. There are negative comments by yeshivas. And he asked me, he pulled me aside and says, what is the reason? I want to point out something. I want to show this folder, which is private information, but it says here, Development Management Services. That's one of my companies, Development Management Services. My attorney has my folder that says Development Management Services. Me, as being a rabbi, I'm a developer as well. The negative yeshivas, and I know some of the yeshivas that did have negative issues, is a typical story. The typical story is the guy has 20 students, he has a small yeshiva, he rents a house, he doesn't know, he's a rabbi, he's not a developer, he doesn't need bank financing, he has a house, or it's his own house, or it's his father's house, or whatever it is. He starts operating as a school. And suddenly, he doesn't realize that there's a whole bunch of code issues involved, and he runs into an issue, or he feels it's not a big deal, and that's, I could see stories happen. And we're dealing with a multi-million-dollar operation. Like, as a developer, I came in, did our due diligence. We have bank financing involved. These negative impacts are not even relatives because, unfortunately, these people do a terrible disservice to our community, obviously. But if you really analyze, if you go through the internet, you go through addresses, you want to go through the whole story, we're not talking about a huge establishment that opened up a yeshiva that has these negatives. We're talking about a guy that has 20, 30 students, and did a house and didn't even realize it. He doesn't know. He's a rabbi. My whole profession, I'm a developer as well, and I'm an assistant rabbi. It's not I built many buildings, and if you look up online, you can see I built over 10 charter schools. We are very familiar, and no bank, no big financial backer will come in and let me buy this building if I wouldn't have the experience that I have. And I think I want to point it out. I know we're all legal today. I got a lawyer here, but my personal opinion, I'm never into legal. I always believe that people should understand, that people should feel comfortable. Like I said, if this does go through, I told them, I said, usually when I have objectors, they end up being my best friends. That's usually what happens. So you'll see for yourself. The phone number, I usually give out my number personally. I'm personally involved because I'm a landlord, not only the rabbi. That's the difference that I wanted to make it clear to you.
All right.
Could I just ask something, just in response to what he said?
We closed the public, just but very briefly. I don't want to shut you down.
I just wanted to ask you, does most of the financing come from grants? Is it grants?
No,
Grant?
most
Okay, thank you.
of it comes from bank financing.
Thank you.
All right. We have to take 2 votes tonight. So the first one, I'm going to ask that Mr. Hare and Mr. Dixon don't vote because they were not here at the August meeting. So it's just going to be 5 people voting. This is on the interpretation. Mr. Nemad's taking a position and made a presentation. This constitutes a permitted school within the R9 zone. Okay, so you get an affirmative motion to grant a favorable, because all motions are in the affirmative. An affirmative motion to grant a favorable interpretation to the applicant that what they are proposing is a school, thus is a permitted use in the R9 zone. Now, the implication to that is that, just so we're clear, a yes vote, you're saying this is permitted and they didn't vote, they don't need a use variance, they didn't really even need to be here. We've made that determination that this use is allowed. A no vote is, no, it's not a permitted use. I think the whole use variance proves that they needed to put on tonight were necessary and needed to go to a vote on the use variance issue. So is everyone clear on that? In making a motion and seconding the motion does not mean you have to vote in favor of it. So that just gets us to a vote.
So the motion will be to grant a favorable interpretation.
To the applicant,
To the
that
applicant.
this is a school, is a permitted use in the R9 zone, and does not need a use variance, which was the bulk of their testimony.
So will someone offer a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Your second.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Roll call, please.
Mr. Peterson?
No.
Mr. Walker?
No.
Mr. Guard?
No.
think what I'll do first is I'm gonna go through the conditions so we're all on the same page, and maybe you can hear the conditions that I kind of wrote down. Now, obviously, if this is granted, we're gonna work with the board. I'll obviously take the first stab at drafting it, but everyone will see it drafted, crafting a narrowly tailored resolution saying that the use that we're granting is limited to what they're proposing and setting forth and subject to several conditions, which I'll state now, but articulate much better in writing. There'll be no student driving, be limited to 90 students maximum, limited to 6 staff at one time at the building. We're obviously going to utilize the existing building as is, we're not going to expand the footprint. And then the applicant will comply with any representations that may be during the course of the hearing. And then anything in Mr. McGowan's report by way of conditions that we didn't address tonight, which I don't really believe there are any in there, but to the extent they're in the incorporated report. And then, not to impose on the rabbi, but Mr. Nemeth, what do you think about some sort of contact information being on file with?
Fine, it's fine with us.
Sure.
I prefer that.
Okay. So
I
those
call
would
it the neighborhood management. I like to get a phone call of any smallest problem right when it starts, not when it finishes. I'm into that.
And of course, if there's any other outside approvals, obviously it's subject to that. So with those conditions, someone needs to make a motion to grant what we call a D1 use variance.
Excuse me, there's one other question. We work with Mr. McGowan on assuring that there's adequate water and sewer, and meeting his reasonable requirements for upgrades that may be necessary.
So noted. So with those conditions, again, we'll articulate them better, approvals granted.
Leo, one quick question regarding the amount of students. Would that then be over, or 90, would that be overridden by any state or other agency requirements for occupancy? You know, I don't know what the
Yeah, if you say 90 max. You'd be granting a maximum if building code only allows 75, and that's all that you allow.
Right.
You don't have the ability to relieve them from additional codes.
Does that need to be stated, or is that there's?
Not to exceed.
Yeah, it's not to exceed 90. So obviously, yeah, I mean, I can articulate that in a resolution. If their CO or their occupancy limit is 75 by the fire official, or whatever the term is, that will have to abide by that.
Right.
So, but yeah, I'll make that clear. But with those conditions noted, the motion is to grant what's called a D1 use variance to allow the proposed use as outlined tonight at this property.
Someone offer a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Your second?
I'll second.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Blair? Mr. McKenna?
Yes.
Mr. Molyneux?
No.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
And Mr. Hare?
No.
We have 4 in the affirmative and 3 in the negative.
That's what I can. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, thank you all very much. I regret that the motion did not carry. We would have been an asset to your community, and this is a very unfortunate occurrence for many, many reasons. Thank you.
Any old business? Any public comments outside of the application?
I have a question. And it might be outside your purview. What's going on with Wawa? Have we got a definite start date yet?
He represents the line.
Yeah, well, that makes me happy.
Check with Ryan, they've been moving things along.
did get some rumors that the material was backed up, and they put material on hold.
Well, they had material delays, they had utility delays, they've had a ton of delays, but they're continuing to work in the background. They're still reaching out, and, you know, they're certainly not abandoned.
Oh, yes, I know. Every day I go home, I hear people on my street doing this to me. What do they do, quit? They moving out?
No.
They're still playing.
You gotta move into that.
Anyone else from the public?
I got a question. I apologize, I wasn't at last month's meeting. When we did the resolution on subdividing of that other parcel, does that make it a separate, is that a, is
Now,
that,
yeah,
is that just another lot that can be developed, or is it actually a separate deed? Can we make that like separate?
it's now a separate, so whoever the owner was, Wawa, for lack of a better term, now owns both properties, but it's a separate lot. And I think their intentions are to either lease that to another operator or sell it to another operator.
Yes.
But it was clear that they'll come
The
back.
only reason why I asked that is I was looking at some other property, for myself, and when I just looked up property, that came up, and, you know, it's listed for $1 million. So.
Listed already?
Yeah.
Are you buying that?
Yeah. So, I was curious if it was a separate deed lot that they're.
Damn, that electric company pays them too much money.
They were selling for 500,000. Then it went to a mill.
So that's why I was just looking for clarity, not that it has any impact.
And the end user will come back.
Yeah.
and do that once they run.
Yeah, too much, right?
Any other questions, comments? Motion to adjourn? Motion. Second, all in favor, please say aye. Adjourn, thank you, folks.
All right.